ages 2 to 18 years old, I lived in this house. Bad things seemed to only occur in my bedroom. With the layout of the room, it's fairly big with a glass sliding door that leads onto the veranda, hence I had blackout curtains. I always felt uncomfortable in the room, so I regularly slept with the lights on and the doors open. My mom used to go to work early in the morning, so I often woke up early too, then laid in bed staring at nothing for like an hour, then go back to sleep. One morning after my mother left, I had a really bad feeling like something there was watching me, and it was angry. Yet I couldn't see anything in the hallway. After some time, the door started swaying, which I decided it was wind, and started drifting off to sleep. Suddenly, there was a bang, which terrified me so much I ran into my parents' room to my dad, who basically told me to just go away. Later, I found a random hunk of wood near the outside wall of the room that seemed like it was just thrown there. Regularly, there was this awful, eerie feeling of basically negative emotions, like feeling uneasy, angry, or sad. Like you would get sudden bouts of these when in the room for too long, and you often felt watched. I often felt like something stood over me when it thought I was sleeping. When I was 13 years old, my parents got me a bunk bed, one where the bottom was a double and the top was a single. At that age, I was also going to boarding school. I actually slept better in boarding school than in my own house, yet somehow with the bunk bed, things got worse. Originally, I was sleeping on the bottom bunk and still slept with a nightlight. Yes, I know. One night, I was rolling over and I randomly punched myself in the face. Suddenly, I got ridiculously angry where I kicked the metal bottom of the top bunk frame out. Because of this, you could sort of see a bend in the frame where someone actually slept on the top bunk. During the school holidays one night, I woke up to see a pair of strange feet quickly climbing up the ladder of the bunk, then saw the top bunk bend as if someone was laying on it. Then what, or whoever it was, started basically growling and grunting while moving around on the top bunk. I was absolutely terrified. I just closed my eyes, and though I'm not firmly religious, I started quietly praying to myself. Suddenly the noise and movement stopped, yet I could sense whatever it was still there. I was too scared to open my eyes in case I saw something. I felt like whatever it was peering its head over the edge of the bunk, staring at me. I lay there until I could hear birds and my parents around the house. I then told my parents, who typically put it down to dreaming. Then I moved into the living room. On the last week of school holidays, my parents made me go back into my room instead of squatting in the living room. My dad even decided to sleep on the bottom bunk and me on the top bunk for the last week before I was scared of the room. While my dad was there, nothing happened. Hence, when the next school holidays came around, I did assume it could very well have been a dream. Until one night I remember feeling cold and that my blanket was around my feet. Because I was tired, I just fumbled around for the blankets and pulled it back up. Shortly after, I could feel the blanket move down. I ignored it, and the blanket moved down to my feet again, so I pulled it back up again. I still was having no realization how this was not normal. Shortly after, I felt the blanket slowly move down again, so I was annoyed and held on to the blanket.
Alright.
Whatever was pulling the blanket started tugging the blanket hard, then yanked it off me. I said, "Have it then," and went back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I found the blanket basically rolled up and crumpled in front of the doorway. Then I realized how strange the entire situation was. At the time, my friends and I in boarding school played pranks on each other, and because I was half asleep, I just imagined it being a prank or something from one of my friends, despite the fact that I was at home. I told my parents, who said I would have kicked the blankets off in my sleep. I tried sleeping in the room again. However, I kept waking up to my blanket getting pulled off me, then finding it balled up in front of the door, so I started sleeping in the living room again. For years, nothing happened until my last year of school, when I got nagged to go to sleep in my room like a normal person, then moved to my top bunk. Two incidences occurred from this. One, waking up to see an outline of a solid person hiding behind my blackout curtains, yet it was somehow like they were impossibly staring through the curtains at me. Again, I was too scared to do anything but close my eyes until morning. During the night, I could hear the curtains flapping, despite there being no breeze, and some breathing. 2. A few weeks later, when I was made to sleep in the room again, after camping out in the living room again, my old bunkmate came to visit where I could feel the entire bunk rocking from something rolling around below while grunting and growling. And I sure wasn't going to check it out. The worst part was it started poking the bottom of the upper bunk mattress. I could feel these sharp pokes from beneath on my back and almost peed myself. That was the last time I ever slept in that room. My parents couldn't make me go back, and I eventually moved out. To hell with that room, and whatever lives in it. I almost always had meetings after school, so my son would wait for me in my classroom. He would do his homework and then go outside to play when study hall was over. One day he told me that he needed to talk to me when I returned from my meeting. Okay, I said. He told me that he had gone to the restroom and that he was washing his hands when he saw his deceased brother in the bathroom mirror. My deceased son said to him, "Dad was in danger, but I fixed it. He is all right." I called my husband right away. My husband had been working in a hospital auditorium on a large extension ladder. The light ballast needed replacing in that room. He asked me how I knew something was wrong. I handed the phone to my son and let him talk to his dad. The extension ladder fell out from under him. He was hanging 30 feet above a floor and was losing his grip. He said he knew he could be killed or maimed if he fell, and he was losing his grip. All of a sudden, he was on the floor. Didn't know how he got there safely. He told me later, "I was so scared. I kept yelling for help, and no one heard me. I was trying to figure out the best way to fall. I think that I blacked out. Then I was on the floor and I was fine. No bruises, no bumps, no scrapes." My son told him that my other son helped him. We don't know how. My little boy was not a big conversationalist. He just said what he said. I am grateful that my ex-husband was not harmed. He has never remembered how he got safely to the floor. When I was in high school, we had this amazing world history teacher.
Man, it's paranoia.
I'll call him
I
Mr.
don't really
Newton
like
for
paranoia.
privacy's sake. The reason why everyone liked him so much and wanted to be in his class was that he was an incredible storyteller. For further reasoning, his stories were all based upon personal and true accounts. This particular story had me walking out of the classroom in tears. When Mr. Newton was a little boy around the age of 7 or 8 years old, he had an older brother whom had just started college. Since Mr. Newton lived in Montana, his older brother decided to go to a nearby college so he was still able to be by his family. Well, late one night, around 2 in the morning, the phone rings in the house. Mr. Newton remembers this well because he remembers waking up not to the phone ringing, but his parents quickly going down the hall to get to the phone. Since the call was so late, they knew that something must be wrong. It turned out to be their son who was in college. And this is what transpired over the phone. Their son was crying so hard that they were on the phone with him for over an hour trying to get the whole scenario out of him. This is what he had told them. Mr. Newton's brother had decided to go to a party with a friend around 9 earlier in the evening. The house that the party was being held at was on the opposite side of the lake in which their dorms were located. His friend had an old beat-up truck and had managed to talk Mr. Newton's brother into going with him. Well, they didn't end up staying too long for some reason or another, and around midnight, decided it was time to head back to the dorms. Now, the lake was pretty large in scale, and it took a good 15 to 20 minutes to drive all the way around it to get back home. So the friend was driving, and Mr. Newton's brother was sitting in the passenger seat. Coincidentally, that side was closest to the shore of the lake. As they were getting about halfway there, his friend makes a comment, stating that there was something up ahead by the road. As they are both looking at this thing, they are far away enough that it looks like that it might be a cat. Well, college boys being college boys, his friend starts to speed up in an attempt to hit him. But as they get closer, he quickly slows back down. It was bigger than a cat. If you live in a highly wildlife-populated state such as Montana, and there seems to be something larger than a cat on the side of the road, that most likely means a deer and a damaged vehicle. So as they slow down, They are both leaning forward in their seats, trying to get a good look at this thing. Its eyes reflected off of the beams of the car, but it wasn't long, like a deer. They finally get close enough to where the creature's body begins to take shape. It looked like a child. Just on the side of the road near the lake, a short humanoid figure was standing there, facing the road. But there was something wrong. Not just the fact that a possible child was standing on the side of the road nearly at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, but they were beginning to make out his clothes about 10 yards from him by this point. It looked like he walked out of the 1800s. He was wearing a long black coat that was so long it slumped down past his feet, dragging in the grass, and he had on a top hat. As his friend began to exclaim in a multitude of swear words, they finally got to the point in which they were both staring right at its face as they were passing it. And what they saw had his friend hitting the gas pedal with all his might, screaming. His face was old, like a 100-year-old man's face might look. His skin was sagging down unnaturally. Both of his eyes were too big for his face, and they were jet black, like a shark's eyes almost, but no whites around the iris at all. He just stared at them with unblinking eyes. So Mr. Newton's brother starts screaming, "Go, go, go!" And they peel away from the curb as if their lives depend on it. It gets worse though. It starts chasing them. Not in the way you would think though. As they pass by it, its head follows the direction of the truck, turning almost like an owl's head would turn. It then starts running, but it never actually turns and runs. It bounds in these disgustingly large leaps, but its head is still twisted around. His friend is screaming to get the gun out at the back, but before Mr. Newton's brother can even start to look for it, it's gone. As soon as they get home, that's when he goes to call his parents, bawling. No one ever saw it again, but his brother never drove at night in that area again either. I guess that for some reason, after Mr. Newton's parents got off the phone, their little 7-year-old son wanted to know what happened and annoyed them until they finally told him. Apparently he slept in their room for 2 months after that, too terrified to sleep alone at night. Anyone ever heard of this kind of creature in Montana, or just in general? I've always been curious about it. My wife and I have been living in a small house for 2 years now. We've been experiencing paranormal activity on and off the entire time. Things have fallen from tables and dressers and lamp.
This happened almost 4 years ago in the early hours of New Year's Day. For reference, I was 17 at the time and in my senior year of high school. I'm a male, and I'm about 5'10" and weighed about 160 pounds at the time. I lived in the suburbs and I was at a New Year's party being held by my friend at his house, which was a 20-minute walk away from my house.
Oh my god.
It was about 1 in the morning and I was about to leave with another friend of mine who lived on the same block as me. My friend who was hosting the party asked if we would like a ride home, and in hindsight we probably should have accepted his offer. But our neighborhood was pretty safe, and we figured with the two of us walking together, no one would bother us. Plus there were probably other people at the party who needed a ride more than we did. We said our goodbyes to everyone and began our walk home. The road was predictably empty with no one but us walking along the sidewalk, and maybe the occasional car passing by. It was pretty well lit though, so we weren't walking in complete darkness. My friend wanted to pick up a pack of cigarettes on the way home, so we stopped off at a gas station along the way. When we got to the gas station, it was nearly empty with only a woman at the pump filling up her car with gas, and a guy posted up in front of the store on his phone. We went inside and my friend picked up a pack of cigarettes.
Sorry if it's loud.
We walked out of the store and my friend immediately lights up a cigarette. We reach the sidewalk and we hear someone behind us yell, "Hey, wait!" We looked behind us to see the guy who was in front of the store quickly walking towards us. He looked to be in his early to mid-20s. He was probably 5'8" and maybe 140 pounds from the look of him. He approached us and asked if he could get a light. My friend and I didn't think much of it and he lit the guy's cigarette. The guy thanked him and my friend said, "You're welcome." We began walking away again and the guy continued to follow us asking where we were going. We told him we were heading home and asked him where he was going. He said his friends were at a party and he was heading back over there as he left to get some fresh air for a bit. He asked if we wanted to come to the party. This is officially the point where red flags start going off with this guy. Why the hell would a guy in his 20s ask two teenage boys if they wanted to go to a party with him? We told him bluntly that we didn't even know who he was, nor did we know anyone at the party he was talking about, so we weren't going. He starts laughing and says that we seemed like cool guys to party with. He told us we needed to let loose a little. My friend and I told him that we were 18 and 17, to see if maybe that would get him to leave us alone. He chuckled and said that age didn't matter to him, that he had a brother who was 16 and he partied with him and his friends all the time. Jesus Christ, can this guy take a hint? I thought to myself. We were a little less than 10 minutes away from our house, and we didn't want this creep following us all the way there. I told him firmly, "Dude, we're not going anywhere with you. Now quit following us and screw off." He gets livid and starts screaming at us for being unfriendly, inconsiderate assholes, and that he was just trying to be nice. He then starts throwing racial slurs at my friend.
It's loud.
It's probably worth mentioning by now that I'm white and my friend is black. My friend yells at him to get away from us before he cracks him in the face, and the guy proceeds to run away from us. My friend and I just looked at each other in complete disgust over what had just happened, and spent the next 5 minutes walking and talking about the creepy guy. We both agreed that he was probably drunk or high from a New Year's party. Next thing we hear a car behind us, and it proceeded to slow down to match our pace. We see the window roll down to reveal the guy that we had just seen a few minutes earlier, with who we presumed to be two of his friends. One of which was a man who was probably about the same age as the guy, and a woman in the back seat who had to be in her mid-30s. The guy tells us that we got off on the wrong foot, and asks us once again to join them at the party. My friend and I looked at each other, and I whispered to him that we needed to get away from them. My friend tells them that we're not going with them, and to leave us alone already. The guy was silent for a few seconds and said, "You're coming with us, one way or another." They pull over and quickly get out of the vehicle, which caused my friend and I to immediately go into flight mode. We turned right on a side block and my friend yelled, "Run to the park, we'll lose them in there." We looked behind us and to our horror, the three men were running right for us. We run into the park, and we once again look behind us, and they're getting closer. We run into the dark, thick patch of trees that covered a good portion of the west side of the park, hoping to evade them. I was panicking at this point, because I couldn't see a damn thing, and I was worried that my friend or I would trip over something and get captured by one of these sick freaks who wanted to do who knows what with us. We hear one of them trip and fall behind us, yelling, "Fuck!" And luckily we see light again, and we make it to another path in the park and we make a left onto that path. We hear yelling behind us and one of the guys said that they lost us. The woman yells to split up and search around the park for us. We bolt towards the bathroom, which thankfully were open, and we hide inside. We took a minute to catch our breath as our lungs were practically burning at that point. We should have called the cops and just hid there until they got there, but at the time we were so focused on getting the hell away from those crazy people that we decided to try and make our way to the nearest exit out of the park and run to my house. We waited for about 2 minutes and we bolted out of the bathroom and toward the park exit. Shortly after we exited the park, we heard one of the guys yell behind us that he had found us, and we were getting away. We looked behind us to see the guy in the distance starting to chase after us. We ran until we reached my house, and I quickly opened the door. We ran inside, and I quickly locked it. We went into my living room and collapsed on the couch. We both sat there silently, trying to regain our energy and calm down after what had happened, hoping they didn't see where we ran to. I looked out the window several times over the course of 10 minutes, and thankfully they never showed up again. We talked about it, and we were glad that we were both okay and nothing bad happened to us. We were trying to figure out what they wanted with us. Did they want to kill us, rob us, have sex with us? God only knows. My friend hung around for another half hour before he insisted on heading home. He left and then I went to bed. I kept thinking about what had happened and pondered on what would have happened if they had caught me. Even as I'm recollecting this, I still have those thoughts. I eventually fell asleep and I woke and told my parents what had happened. They were thankful that my friend and I were okay, but were upset with us that we chose to walk home, and should have accepted the lift from our other friend or even called them, and they would have picked us up. Regardless, we filed a police report, and I gave them all the information I could. Unfortunately, we never heard anything about it again, and I wonder sometimes what the hell they've been doing ever since. I really hope they haven't harmed another person after that. I can't express how thankful I am that we managed to get away from those freaks, and to this day, this incident is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. This incident definitely made me more wary of my surroundings, and I try my best to avoid situations when I need to walk late at night, whether I'm by myself or not. This happened 4 years ago when I was in college. It was around 2 a.m. at my friend's parents' house, who were very laid back. And that's an understatement. Myself, my cousin Ted, and his girlfriend at the time, Holly, were snoozing in the living room. A phone goes off that wakes Ted and I, and see it's Holly's phone. Holly is in a deep, pot-induced coma, so we ignore it and go back to sleep. The phone continues to ring, so Ted finally answers it. They've never been shy of looking into each other's phones, but don't abuse the privilege. He says hello a few times before a male voice asked for Holly. Ted immediately hung up and got suspicious as to why a man was calling Holly at 2 a.m. He goes through her phone while I go to the bathroom. While washing my hands, Ted knocks on the door hard, saying, "Hey, we need to take her home now." So I dry my hands and he wakes her up, and we all get in the car and drive off to her part of town. Holly keeps asking Ted what's wrong and what's going on. Ted finally blew up about the call. Emails he found in her phone proving she had been prostituting herself on Craigslist again. And that he was done. I'm as quiet as a crypt keeper, and she's bawling her eyes out and losing her shit trying to explain. We get to her house, and before I can even fully stop the car, he tells her to get the fuck out and lose his number. She goes inside a snotty mess and we leave. When we pull up to his house, we sit outside in my car for a while, taking in what had just happened, and giving him time to vent and tell me that this isn't the first time they've dealt with this.
Shit.
Out of nowhere, a black town car pulls up to the right of us, and Ted says, "Oh shit." 3 people, 2 men and an older woman, get out and surround the car. I can see that the younger of the 2 men has a firearm. The woman goes up to Ted's side of the car and starts yelling at him to take his ass whooping like a man. I start freaking out, asking who these people are, as the woman starts trying to yank my doors and punch my windows. Ted says it's Holly's mom and her stepdad and her cousin. When the mom punched my window a 3rd time, I noticed the cousin laying his hand near his firearm. So I flight one and immediately put the car in reverse and drove backwards down the street to get away. I slid into a person's yard because of mud and kind of ruined their grass. I've since apologized and compensated for the damage, and took off when we see them run after the car and give chase. I had never been so panicked for my life. We're flying down regular roadways ranging 50 to 60 miles per hour. I'm running red lights, taking last-minute turns. I must have burned all the tread off my tires because my car skidded a good handful of times. They chased us for 22 minutes while the whole time I'm praying, "Where the hell is a cop when you need one?" When we got to a quiet neighborhood I knew well, we turned down a street heavily covered in trees, and Ted said, "Turn off your lights and stay off the brake." I do as I'm told, and we roll down the street slowly. I stared into my rearview mirror as we saw them drive past the road that we were on, very slowly, but thankfully they didn't see us. When we were sure we lost them, I parked and started yelling at Ted, asking them why the hell they were chasing us and what was going on. As I'm having a panic attack, his phone rings and it's the mom. He answers and they say they want to meet and talk and get Holly's phone back. In the heat of everything, idiot Ted forgot to give Holly her phone back. I said I'm not meeting them without a cop present, so we tell them to meet us at a local gas station that we know cops frequent. When we got there, thankfully there was an officer on duty. They arrived 2 minutes after we did, and Ted got out to deal with them in plain view of a cop and camera outside of the gas station. I noticed the cousin was not in the car when they pulled up. I couldn't make out everything that was said, but Ted handed over her phone. They talked for about 15 minutes with her flailing her hands, getting in his face, and even pointed at a cop in what looked like she was going to say something to them. When it was over, he got back in and we drove off. Apparently, when we dropped Holly off, she walked into her house crying. Her family was up and immediately asked what was wrong, and Holly wouldn't say anything about it. Just cried. So in their minds, they jumped to the conclusion that Ted had hit her. She didn't even try to correct them. When he tried to show her mom proof of her ways, she completely rug-swept and tried to make him the reason for all of it. I told him he was better off without that crazy and dodged a bullet. The next week was spring break, and we took a much-needed trip to Colorado. To give a little backstory, I am an 8404 Hospital Corpsman, attached to the 3rd Marine Division 3rd Battalion. At the time of this story, we were stationed at an undisclosed location in Afghanistan. I have changed the names to protect those involved. Afghanistan is a place that not many people willingly go unless they have a screw loose, or are just lacking a screw altogether. I'm lacking the screw. I was a hospital corpsman, a combat medic for the Marines for those who don't know, stationed on a small shithole of a fob in Afghanistan for 18 months. We were about 3 months into the deployment when the events of this story took place, and my perception of what was true was forever changed. It all started on the 4th of February 2012. First, let me introduce myself. I am Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class, FMF, Ellis, and I had been with my Marines for a little under 6 months at this point, but we were a tight-knit group. I woke up at around 2 a.m. that morning. We had just come back from a particularly nasty mission outside the wire, and I was having trouble sleeping. I rolled off my cot. We didn't have rooms at this point, just a tent and some cots, and groaned, forcing the sleep from my eyes. It was cold, very cold. I stood up to my joints cracking and loomed around. So far, everyone was asleep. I pulled up my pants and my blouse and laced up my boots, pulled my leg holster on, buckled it, and grabbed my rifle. I slowly made my way through the crowded tent and out the flaps that made the door. I knew I wouldn't be able to get back to sleep, so I figured that I'd knock out the mountain of paperwork I had to do. But first, nature was calling. Now, when I say a small fob, I mean small. To go from the front gate to the rear chain link would take you no more than 20 minutes on foot, so going to the latrines from the barracks took a whopping 5 minutes. But in negative temperatures, it felt like hours. I moved through the fob as quickly as possible so I could seek the warmth of my office. I had made it to the latrines, did my business, and was moving back through the base when I got the feeling of being watched. It was a feeling I was used to, but this was different. I could feel whoever was watching me boring a hole in my skull. I brushed it off and moved to my office. Fast forward several hours. I had fallen asleep at my desk and was shaken awake by a Marine. I stood up and shook the sleep from my body. I looked at the young devil dog that woke me, Private Anderson. He was essentially my babysitter. "Hey, Devil, what can I do you for?" I asked him. He sighed. "Just figured I'd let you get some chow. We have a mission to do later. It's 0800 right now. Mission starts at 1500. What do you say?" he asks me. I smile slightly. "Yeah, sure," I say, and walk out of the building my office is in. It was warming up, and I peeled the heavy Gore-Tex off and tossed it on my desk. We made it to the chow hall, and Anderson grabbed my arm. "Hey, do you feel that?" he asked. I knew what he was talking about. The hair on my arms and neck were standing up. I felt it. We were being watched. "Yeah, let's go." I ushered him into the chow hall. The 4th of February, 2012, 1500 hours. We all stood outside our convoy, our gunny giving us our briefing. Unfortunately, I can't talk about the OPSEC and all. And it happens again. I get that feeling someone is watching. A chill runs down my spine. In my gut, I knew things were gonna get bad. But brush it off as nerves. Fast forward an hour and I'm jamming to One by Metallica while riding in one of the mine-resistant vehicles. We are in a canyon. The sun is high in the sky and everything is kosher. That's when time stood still. The next 5 minutes seemed to last an eternity. The IED went off under the truck ahead of us. The noise was deafening and the blast rattled my very core. Our driver jerked the wheel to the right and we went off the road. I was tossed around like a rag doll. That's when I heard it. The tiny sounds of bullets whizzing by us and ricocheting off the armor of our vehicles. My training kicked in. This was not the first and certainly would not be my last firefight. I kicked the door in front of me with all my might and it flew open. I lurched out of the opening and slid to a crouched position, taking cover as rounds whizzed by me. My ears still ringing, I could finally smell it. A mix of burning oil, flesh, and sulfur. I choked back a gag and looked around. Marines were all in cover and engaging the enemy, who was positioned on a small outcrop a few hundred meters up the hillside. I peeked around the rear of my vehicle, aimed down my sights, slowly let my breath out, then squeezed the trigger. The fighter in front of me dropped, a red mist emerging from him. I pulled my head back as a few rounds peppered the sand where I was peeking out. Now the roar of the 50 cal was echoing. The fighting went on for about 20 minutes until it died down and eventually stopped. We had sustained 4 casualties, 2 KIA, the drivers of the truck in front of us, and 2 bullet wounds that had already been sent away on an evac. I checked ammunition and moved to the group of Marines that were formed, listening to what Gunny had to say in regards to what we were going to do now. One vehicle was destroyed and the one I was in was busted up and unmovable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up again. I felt it. Someone was watching again. I glanced around, checking my peripherals. All was well from what I could tell. I felt it before I heard it. It felt like someone jammed a red-hot fire poker in my left forearm and right thigh. Time stopped. I felt my leg give way to my body weight and I fell to the sand. Then the pain. It hurt. Oh, it hurt. I tried to move my hand, and could not. The next wave of pain hit me, causing me to yell out. Marines were firing at the area where the shots came from, and now I'm being dragged to a nearby rock. As I'm being dragged, I look down. My left arm from elbow down is crimson, and my right leg is spurting blood. The thought, I'm going to die here, flashed in my mind as a Marine started turning a tourniquet on my leg. Another wave of pain. Another scream. Lots of voices around me now. People applying pressure. Quick clot being applied. Then black. I came to 2 days later in a white hospital room to the sound of monitors beeping. I looked around, sat up, spun around and attempted to stand. My right leg gave and I caught myself on my bed railing. I had been shot multiple times. Once in the left forearm, once in the right thigh, nicking the femoral artery, which resulted in 3 blood transfusions because of blood loss. I was in Landstuhl, Germany. I got a Purple Heart for that, and 6 months of physical therapy. That was my last deployment. I was separated 6 weeks out of physical therapy. To the Taliban sniper who shot me 3 times, you had better hope we don't meet, because if we do, you will get to meet Allah a lot sooner than you anticipated. I am telling this story on behalf of my best friend Tom, who I've known since childhood and who I consider a brother. He served with the Army for several years as an infantryman with the 1st Battalion 75th Ranger Regiment. After he returned home from his combat tour in Afghanistan, he had more than a few stories to tell. However, I'm immensely sad to say that we lost Tom in a car accident recently.
God.
I know sharing a story like this is a strange way to honor someone's memory. However, there is one story from his time in Afghanistan that I always felt merited a submission. Tom would agree. He also visited Let's Not Meet occasionally, but never quite found the time to sit down and write about his experiences. There are many stories that will forever remain between me and him, but I know this one he always wanted to share. With that in mind, I'll do my best to pass it along. I want it noted that the details are somewhat hazy. It has been some time since his last recalling, in addition to the obvious OPSEC concerns. In 2013, Tom's unit was deployed to Afghanistan's Kandahar province. He was a private first class at the time and had been in the Army for a year by the beginning of his tour, with the last several months of that assigned to the 1st Ranger Battalion. He'd gone through immensely difficult training, up to and including jumping out of several perfectly good airplanes, to get where he was now, and as such was eager to finally do his job. He ultimately participated in 19 combat missions during his 4 months in country, all of them night raids aimed at capturing high-value targets, local Taliban cell commanders or other persons of interest. You see, the Rangers and other special operation forces specialize in nighttime operations. They train at night and operate frequently under the cover of darkness. The Taliban lacked widespread night vision optics, whereas each individual ranger was equipped with some of the finest nods money could buy, and the accessories to complement them. With that advantage on top of their large numbers and superior training, it was hard for them not to feel like they owned the night when they went out on target. However, this wasn't always the case. One night, Tom's platoon was tapped for yet another HVT raid. After the typical briefing and preparation process, the 30 or so guys boarded the Chinooks and proceeded to the target location, disembarking under the cover of darkness to secure the area. Tom was a member of a two-man machine gun team. His leader, Corporal Kyle, manned the 240 Lima machine gun. As his assistant gunner, it was Tom's responsibility to carry spare linked ammunition belts, call out fire adjustments, and act as a bodyguard to the corporal and his weapon should the enemy attempt to flank them. After leaving the chopper, Tom and Kyle moved to their designated blocking position, a vantage point in which a fire team can set up and interdict enemy forces attempting to enter or leave a target area. The target in this case was a small village, seemingly abandoned and heavily deteriorated, with crumbling masonry and multiple bombed-out huts. The entire place was incredibly unsettling, showing no signs of life other than a single black cat that slinked amongst the shadows of the buildings. The moon was high in the sky that night, bathing the ramshackle collection of seemingly ancient structures in an eerie light. After ensuring the 240 Lima was set up, Tom surveyed the village. He ultimately focused on a damaged stone wall less than 50 meters away. There was a hole punched out in the center of it, just large enough for a man to stick his head and shoulders through. He watched the hole intently for almost the entire mission, infrared laser up and M4A1 at the ready, expecting the barrel of an AK-47 to appear in it at any moment. It never did. The rifle team proceeds into the village and searches top to bottom, finding no traces of the high-value target they were after, or any signs of life at all for that matter. Kyle and Tom relocated to link up with several members of a rifle squad in a large ditch over 100 meters away from the target site. They continued to watch the perimeter as discussions were being held about how to proceed. That's when all hell broke loose. One of the platoon's senior sergeants came running over, yelling at Tom and the other rangers to get out of the ditch. The comms net exploded with orders to fall back to the LZ for immediate exfiltration. Tom and Kyle were beyond confused. Had EOD picked up something? Maybe they were all standing atop a buried IED belt, something far from unheard of. The Chinooks double-timed it back to their location and landed, allowing all of the rangers to board. After a final head count to ensure no one had been left behind, the helicopters lifted off and returned to the airfield. The mission had lasted less than an hour, seemingly ending as soon as it had begun, all without a single shot being fired and no contact with the Taliban. Or so Tom thought. After returning to base, the platoon was debriefed, and the reason for the sudden scrub of the mission became very clear. Shortly after Tom and Kyle had posted up in the ditch, signals collection specialists attached to the Rangers had picked up enemy radio chatter in the vicinity of the assault force. Very clearly and calmly, the Taliban had spoken. There are 6 men in the ditch. 2 of them are manning a machine gun on the leftmost edge. They are facing the northwest. You can flank them if you follow the berm. They proceeded to list a magnitude of details about the assault force and their positions. They were stalking the Rangers, hunting the hunters. Based on the chatter, it was clear that an unknown number of insurgents were setting up a potential deadly ambush. Other than the intercepted broadcast, the Rangers had been completely unaware of their presence. None of the men on the ground had seen any indication of enemy activity. The trained canines hadn't picked up any scents. The drones and Overwatch aircraft circling the area didn't see a damn thing, even with FLIR, thermal vision. Yet the Taliban were listing numerous meticulous details about the Rangers as if they were standing right next to them in the darkness. It was a humbling experience for the entire platoon. For Tom, that mission always sent a shiver up his spine to think about, even though later ops during the same deployment involved full-scale firefights and ambushes. This took place during the summer of 1993. I was living in Montana but had a boyfriend in British Columbia, and I often traveled between the two places. We were broke and careless, so we hitchhiked when we needed to get somewhere further than biking distance. I had spent the month of August with him in BC, and eventually it was time to go back to school. I, of course, not having worked much at all that summer, had no money. My bum-ass boyfriend hadn't come through with any money for a bus ticket either. My parents were mad at me, so they weren't giving me any money. All my friends were broke, but we didn't have a phone to call them anyway. We were living in a 2-room cabin with no running water in the mountains. The only phone was a party line that belonged to the neighbors and was basically only for emergencies. The decision was made. I was already 2 days late for school and I didn't feel like panhandling for a bus ticket. I had to get back and couldn't wait for my boyfriend's money to materialize. It would be my first time hitchhiking alone. I put my backpack's worth of stuff together, making sure I had my ID, because one time we hitched to the border, left Canada and tried to get into the US before I realized I had left my ID in Canada, meaning I had no ID to enter the US, but also no ID to get back into Canada. But that's a story for another day, and hit the road. Things went surprisingly smooth for the majority of the trip. An elderly couple picked me up as soon as I got off the mountain and into town and took me all the way to Creston, right near the border crossing. I walked across and was almost immediately picked up by a guy who at first gave me mild creeps, but all he did was lecture me about how dangerous it was to hitchhike alone and how much I reminded him of his daughter. He took me all the way to Coeur d'Alene, which was damn near half the trip. I was actually having phenomenal luck. I walked to just outside the city limits and stuck my thumb out. 1 hour went by, then 2. You're often walking really slow when you're trying to catch a ride, and eventually I came across a small flap of cardboard. I picked it up, thinking I could walk off at the next exit, borrow a marker at a gas station, and make a sign. I thought that might help me get a ride. So I'm walking alone a little faster now, and suddenly I see something moving in my peripheral vision. I tense, look and see it's a 2-foot, thin, dark snake trying to get over the cement guardrail to the shoulder. He was never going to make it. He was kind of trying to throw himself over it sideways. I happen to kind of like snakes, and he looked pretty harmless, so I used my sign as a shovel and pitched him over the wall. In hindsight, I should have realized the snake was a bad omen. Before I could reach the next exit, a car slowed to a stop. It's always creepy when a car stops and you're walking up to it, trying to judge if it's a Ted Bundy or just an eccentric like you. My heart always sank a little when it would be a single man, but I soon realized he wasn't alone. There was a kid in the front seat who was probably aged 10 to 13. The guy was a little too friendly, but what was he gonna do? Murder me in front of his kid? I was very young and dumb. I decided to get in. The man was pretty chatty, introducing the kid as his nephew. He said they were driving back to where they lived in St. Louis from visiting his brother in Seattle so the kid could visit his grandma. The kid hardly said a word. If I remember correctly, and it's been a very long time, it's about 3 hours to where I live from Coeur d'Alene. He was taking Highway 90 right past the city I lived in, so I was relieved I wouldn't have to get out of the car and thumb it again. The first hour goes by, and it's friendly chit-chat, lots of family anecdotes, and general small talk. The switchblade my boyfriend gave me was cradled in the bottom of my palm the whole time, up my sleeve and out of view, but I began to relax a little. He kept up the friendly chatter, but eventually the questions he asked took a raunchier turn. Like, did I have a boyfriend? What was he like? What did we like to do? What was our favorite position? What? I silently panicked. Like, oh, fuck, this guy is a creep after all. My instinct was to play along with this conversation while I tried to figure out what to do. I was pretty sure the drink he had in the console, in a convenience store cup, had more than pop in it, because you could see him physically getting looser as the drive went on. He kept asking gross questions, and I was so embarrassed for his nephew but still playing along. I just tried to breathe deeply to keep from having an anxiety attack, and concentrated on extricating myself from his car. Eventually, he made it clear that he expected me to have sex with him in exchange for the ride. Door-to-door service, he said. Then it got worse. And find one of your girlfriends for my nephew, he said with this hyper-cheerful, also menacing smile that made my stomach drop. Yeah, I had to get away from this guy ASAP. At this point, we were about 20 minutes from the town I lived in. I was like, sure, and started making stuff up about a phantom hot slutty friend I had. Then it finally hit me what I could do to get away. I put on my best come hither smile and said to him, you know, I bet she's home now. Let's go straight over to her place when we get into town and get this date started. So I had him get off at my exit and asked if I could get some beer first for our date. In Montana, you could buy beer at gas stations, so I had him stop at a place a few blocks from where I lived. When he somewhat reluctantly went inside to buy beer, which I knew was in the back of the store, I opened my door and sprinted down the alley about a block and dove into a huge clump of bushes, folded myself up as tight as I could, and waited. I still had my knife, but now it was out of my sleeve. I was shaking and my heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would explode. I tucked my head into my knees and waited, listening for his car to come down the alley. When he had got to the gas station, it was about 4 p.m. and September, so there was still plenty of light. I stayed in those damn bushes until night fell, and then I finally sprinted home. His car never came down the alley, but I could hear him yelling for me. He sounded pissed. I got in my front door, locked and deadbolted it, and collapsed, dirt and little leaves all over me. My roommate was like, "What the fuck happened to you?" I told her the abbreviated version, and she said, "Why didn't you call me? I would have picked you up at the border." For context, I'm a 5'2" female who couldn't handle herself in a fight against a tissue. This just happened earlier today, and I can't think of a better place to vent about it. I work for USPS as a city carrier. For those that don't know, that means I walk, a lot, and through all types of neighborhoods. That being said, I worked in a relatively small town, and while there were some parts of it that were mostly run down, I've never had any bad encounters. Until today. The last bit of my route is 3 streets that run parallel to each other, so you walk up and down one street, drive the car to the next, and walk up and down it, etc. I'd say it's a low to middle income area, but nothing that makes you feel uneasy. Just a bunch of cheap college apartments and a few rundown houses. I'm beginning the first of my streets and I see this man, maybe 20 years old, riding his bike on the opposite side of the street, but going in the same direction I am. I thought nothing of it and went about my business. He ended up turning a corner at the end of the block and I forgot about him. I'm continuing walking down the same street when I notice this guy is right next to me again. I think it's a little bizarre, but figured he's taking laps around the block or something. Mind you, it's a solid 10 degrees outside today, with snow on the ground. So looking back, it's a bit strange that somebody would be out for a casual bike ride. But people have done weirder things. I'm finishing up at the last houses on the street and heading back to my van when I notice this dude is now going the same way I am again, even though I had turned around and started going the opposite direction now. I thought everything was a coincidence, until I drove down the next street. My first stop there is an apartment box. For those who might not know, that's one huge mailbox with several mailboxes inside of it. And all that means is I have to spend a decent amount of time there because there's maybe 16 people's mail I'm sorting out. While I'm doing that, the guy shows up again and just sits on his bike, blankly staring at me a few yards away while I work. I again gave this all the benefit of the doubt and think that maybe he's just waiting for me to finish the box so he could check his mail. As I lock it up and move on to the next house, I see him following behind me. When I stop at a house to deliver, he stops in the street and stares. It's at this point I decide there is something going on that I need to distance myself from, and go back to my van despite having almost the entire street left to deliver. I go back to the post office and tell my boss what had happened, and he agrees to have me deliver mail for another route on the opposite side of town. I gladly do this, and it takes maybe an hour and a half. I figured they'd trade off the mail and somebody else would go finish the small portion I had left with the creepy dude. Not so much. Once I get back to the office, I get asked to go finish the route from this morning. I was hesitant, but the point was made that it was hours later. It had started raining, because why would they be there 2 hours later on a bike in the rain? And that they'd send somebody to patrol the street. Fine. I head back out with a coworker following in another car behind me. I finish the street I had left earlier without any problem, so he heads back to the office. I moved to my last street, feeling relatively at ease, and start to wonder if I was overreacting this morning. I get to the end of my first half of the street, conveniently the farthest I can get away from my vehicle during this entire ordeal. And there he is. He pops out from behind a house on his bike, riding furiously in my direction. Panic sets in. I try to stay calm as I act as if I wasn't bothered by his presence at all, but he's riding right on my heels, speeding up to get in front of me and then just blankly staring through me again until I pass him, and the following continues. I casually put my hands into my bag so my hands are free, that way I can get my mace as I call my boss. I didn't want this guy to know I was panicking and calling for help, so I pretended my boss is another city carrier just a few streets away. Hey Dave, I know you're working just a couple blocks away from here, and I have a couple really heavy packages I need you to help me deliver. I'm on Harrison Street now, etc. My boss was so confused. He started telling me how he wasn't a few streets over and that I was calling the wrong person while I'm practically yelling over him. Oh yeah, I can get the numbers off the packages. Hold on, let me get to my car. Just don't hang up yet. I can get them right now. Because I really didn't want him to hang up. This guy hasn't said a word to me, but is still right on my heels. Literally. Had I stopped walking, he would have ran my ankle over. I make it back to the car and tell my boss what is actually happening while this dude circles around me. As I drive away down the street, I see him racing on his bike behind me, chasing my car. I made a few turns down the blocks trying to see if I could lose him, and he's behind me the entire time until I reach the busy main road where he stops. The cops were called, and I was instructed once again to return to the street to finish the mail, with the cops patrolling the area to hopefully bait this dude into getting caught. No surprise he didn't show up. Nothing changed for me at work. My bosses didn't seem to care what had happened to me, and unfortunately I am not in a position to just up and quit my job, although I am looking for a new one, and I have ended up having to grin and bear being put back on the same route that all this happened on. It's been almost 2 weeks since the original encounter, and up until Wednesday I thought maybe the person was just trying to mess with me and now he was over it because I hadn't seen him again. January 10th. I was on my last street for the day and I was starting to loosen up since I was about to turn around and head back up the street to my vehicle when I saw him. The car is a little more than 600 feet away and he is standing on the sidewalk midway between me and it, just staring at me. I immediately try to calculate my options. I decided it was either attempt to get past him to my car, or pick a random house and start knocking, hoping to God somebody answers the door quickly. Fight or flight kicked in, and all I could think about was getting back into my locked car and getting the hell out. So that's what I tried to do. I crossed the street to create at least some distance between us, then was sort of relieved when I saw that he didn't follow suit. At this point he's still a good 300 feet away from me, and I'm not sure why, but something is telling me to just avoid direct eye contact with him and keep walking. As I get closer to him, however, I could see that he was masturbating.
What?
Right there on the sidewalk in broad daylight, just staring at me. Fear took over and I immediately started sprinting, but I was met with the hair-raising sound of his shoes echoing mine. He was screaming, "Hey, you, girl!" Something else, but due to my adrenaline and sheer panic, it just sounded like muffled noise that I can't recall. I thought about turning around to mace him as he was getting closer and closer to me, but at the moment running was working, and I didn't want to risk some horrible horror movie scene scenario when I tripped. Luckily, running worked, and I got back to my car and locked it and called the police. I don't know why I didn't move the car immediately. I guess I was just too focused on getting officers there to help me out, but I don't know. As I'm on the phone with dispatch, this guy is circling my car, dick out, making obscene gestures and trying to get me to look at him. Finally, something clicks in my head that I'm not trapped there, and I can in fact just drive away. So I do. I go up the street and turn into a busy apartment complex to talk to the officer that showed up. I watched the guy turn around and run back inside the house he was originally standing in front of. So for those of us wondering how the hell he found me the second time in my last story, he lives right there on that street. Cops followed up with me later that evening and informed me that they had made contact with the individual, and that they'll be getting a hold of me soon. But so far that's all I've heard. As far as my bosses are concerned, they aren't taking anything seriously since the guy didn't physically touch me, and have scheduled me back on that same route next week. I'm looking for a new job, so hopefully this is the last update you'll hear about this. Fingers crossed. During my first and only semester of college, my very good friend Jake was dating this girl, Stacy, that we knew in high school. For reference, I'm female and was 18 at the time, now 26. Now, many people back in high school did not like Stacy, and I was one of them. To me, she was the definition of a sketchy person. She was a pathological liar, and not even a good one, as her stories rarely added up and she would constantly contradict herself, sometimes within minutes after she spouted her lie. She was one of those girls that hated drama, yet it always magically seemed to follow her around anywhere she went. She was constantly in and out of relationships throughout high school, and would go out of her way to prove they were the crazy ones by spreading rumors about them and getting as much sympathy from everyone around her as she could. She always had to be the center of attention wherever she went. I remember during prom night she went dancing with her then boyfriend and he accidentally stepped on her foot while dancing, and she caused a huge scene about how he was physically abusing her. It was painful to watch. There's much more I could get into about this chick, but in general, she's just an extremely toxic person who nobody should be subjected to be in the presence of. It's also worth noting that she has a drug problem that she's often tried to hide. This will come into play later. Back to the story. Jake and Stacy had class together and hit it off rather quickly. Jake was skeptical at first, but when Jake brought up her reputation in high school, Stacy claimed that she was raped by an ex-boyfriend she had, and that's why she acted the way she did, and that she worked on getting better and was fine now. My friend, being incredibly insecure about being single and being way too trustworthy, believed her and they began dating soon after. The relationship was extremely dysfunctional and was the most rampant with emotional abuse and manipulation on her end, but the aspect I want to focus on is her constantly trying to squeeze money out of him for her aforementioned drug problem. Stacy would constantly ask Jake for small amounts of money here and there, usually ranging between $10 and $20. Jake didn't mind at all, as he bought into her story of her struggling financially, so he felt bad. But one day she asked him for $500 to cover rent, which he refused. She flipped out on him and didn't talk to him until she drunk dialed him late at night and began revealing that she was doing drugs, and it was all because of how terrible her life was and that he wasn't helping. I don't know why he didn't break up with her then and there, but the next day they talked it out and made up and the issue was dropped. Here's where everything finally comes to a head. It was around 10:30ish on a Friday night, and keep in mind that they've been dating for nearly 2 months at this point. I'm chilling in the living room with another friend of mine. We're sitting on the couch bullshitting about stuff going on in our lives, and I get a call from Jake. Jake explained to me that Stacy was hanging out at a friend's house for the day and asked if he could pick her up around midnight as the buses in the area stopped running after 8, and she needed to be in work at 9 the next morning. He said sure, and as the time he headed to leave to pick her up drew closer, his mother called him saying she was working overtime and wouldn't be out until midnight, and she had the call. He asked if I could drive with him to go pick Stacy up. I'll admit I would have rather left her to her own devices, but he sounded desperate and he is an amazing friend who would do anything for me, so I did him a solid and told him to start walking over to my house. He gets to my house about 40 minutes later. My friend went back to her house. She lived across the street from me, and Jake and I get in my car. He texts her that he's leaving now and that I'm driving him, to which she replies the dreaded, "K." I drove an '04 Subaru Impreza, WRX STI, at the time for reference. We reached Stacy's friend's house, which was located on the outskirts of town in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. The road was poorly lit, and to my luck the streetlight in front of Stacy's house was off. I refused to park in front of there as I didn't feel comfortable sitting in the dark, so I parked 3 houses down between 2 cars under a functional streetlight. Jake texts Stacy, "We're here." She doesn't respond. As we were waiting there, a truck drives by and I notice 4 men in the truck. I think it was an Oldsmobile, looking around for something. At first I figured maybe they were lost and looking for an address, but this thought was thrown out the window when not even 2 minutes later the truck drives by again, this time slower. The guy in the front passenger seat makes direct eye contact with me as the truck passes my car by. I tell Jake something is definitely wrong and to call Stacy so we can leave. He agrees and calls her, and it's dead quiet outside so I can hear the conversation. She answers and says, "Hey, where are you?" "We're down the block. Come outside," Jake said. "I'm looking outside and I don't see your car," she answered back. "We're in Shakira's car. It's a gray Subaru, Jake said back, and almost immediately after he said that the phone call drops. Jake just looks at his phone in complete confusion, wondering what the hell is going on. I'm starting to get extremely nervous now, between both the truck that was circling around before and now Stacy's sketchy behavior. I decide that if something's up, I'm not just going to be a sitting duck and stay parked on the road if shit goes south. I pull out of the spot and drive up in front of the house, and as I'm pulling out I hear a vehicle loudly in the distance behind us, and I look in my rearview mirror to see the truck from before now turning quickly driving up the block. I freak out and floor it out of the spot and begin speeding down the block. The truck catches up with me and Jake yells at me to turn and that they're trying to shoot the car. To my horror, I look behind and the guy in the back seat is leaning out the window with a gun in his hand, aiming at the car. I quickly turn and floor it down the road as they struggle to mirror what I did. I made another left turn, narrowly missing an oncoming car, and slammed on the gas. Luckily, I'm halfway down the block by the time they turn onto it. I'm surprised I was driving as well as I was at the time. Jake said I looked extremely calm and determined during all of this, but internally I was freaking out. I was worried they were going to run me off the road or we were going to get a bullet shot through the back of our skulls. I made another left turn and drove like a bat out of hell towards the highway. The truck turned onto the block when I was about a block down, but stopped and turned down another block when I got close to the highway. I turn onto the highway and merge into the next lane. A few minutes pass by with us going back and forth questioning who those guys were and what the hell they wanted, until Jake gets a call on his phone from Stacy. He picks it up, puts it on speaker, and shakingly says hello. "Where are you? I'm fucking waiting here for you," she screams. He explains the situation, to which she proceeds to call him a liar and that he's not actually here, and was standing her up. Jake loses his shit and screams at her that he almost got killed and calls her out for her bizarre behavior throughout all of this. She starts yelling again, but she goes silent as we hear a door quickly open and someone loudly yells in the background on the phone, "They got away! Stacy, where the fuck are you?" Silence follows for the next few seconds before she hangs up the phone. Jake and I look at each other and Jake said, "She had something to do with this." Long story short, we spent the entire drive theorizing why this happened, and we think we may have hit what happened. Jake brought up her asking for money before she had asked for the $500. She probably needed the money to pay off a dealer, and when she didn't get it, she had to find another way. We think she set us up to head to that house to pick her up, and those guys were probably the dealer and his buddies, would conveniently show up looking to rob us of everything we had on us, and probably jack the car hoping it would cover her debt. She probably thought Jake was using his car and gave them the description of his car, not realizing we were using my car, which might explain why they circled the block in confusion, and why she hung up the phone immediately after Jake gave her a description of my vehicle, as she probably called them to update them. I dropped Jake off at his house and I went home. I know people say after scary encounters they're always shaken up, and their emotions are running in a million directions, but I was just emotionally drained. I felt like I just couldn't feel anything and just wanted to go home and go to bed, which was what I immediately did when I got home. I filed a police report the next morning on those guys, and they said they'd look into it. But I never heard anything after I filed the report, so who knows what they've been up to ever since. As far as Stacy goes, our theory was further solidified when Jake saw her in class on Monday, where she approached him and berated him for Friday night, claiming she walked all the way home and had her phone and wallet stolen by some druggies. Jake basically called her out on that whole night, claiming she set us up to get robbed, to which she denied and called him crazy. He told her they were done, and she just yelled, "Fine," and walked to the back of the room. The druggies were probably the dealer and his friends who robbed her to cover the debt. To our surprise, she never attempted to contact us again, and kept her distance, probably because she knew we were onto her and wanted to keep the heat off of her. After I dropped out, I never saw her again, and last I heard about her was from Jake, where he told me she developed a long-distance relationship with some guy online and dropped out halfway through the semester to move to Massachusetts to live with him. As far as I know, that's the last anyone I know ever saw or heard from her. Overall, I'm happy I trusted my instincts and picked up on the fact that something was wrong, as this encounter may have been a different outcome. In hindsight, they most likely weren't going to kill us. But that's easier to say after the fact, because at the time we didn't know what their intentions were, and for all we know, they may have even had more planned than just to rob us. This was the first of quite a few scary and creepy experiences I've had in my life, and this actually wasn't the scariest one for me. But that's another story for another time. So, Stacy, and the foreman in the truck. My life has been going perfectly fine since we met. Please do me a favor and don't ruin it by crossing paths with me again. Thank you. I'm a 27-year-old female, but this happened when I was 13. The summer of 2003, I went on a cross-country road trip to California from Indiana for a family reunion with my mom, grandma, and aunt. We went all over and hit all the touristy spots on the way. It was a lot of fun and a great experience, except for our first stop. For our first stop, we spent 5 days in Las Vegas, Nevada. The hotel we stayed at was an off-the-strip place called the Excalibur. The front wasn't facing a busy street, and besides being next to the Luxor, everywhere around it was dingy and barren. We parked and get our luggage, and my mom thinks it would be a great idea for her 4'11", 90-pound string bean daughter to carry one of Grandma's suitcases, which happened to be the biggest one we all had, with it coming up to my shoulder and almost as wide as two of me. And oh yeah, no wheels. Since my pleas and complaints that the suitcase was too heavy for me to carry went ignored, and Grandma forbade me from dragging it, I had to lift the thing in front of me and waddle, making me very slow and fall in line behind the three of them. I firmly believe this is what made me a target in the first place. As we made for the door, I noticed a man sitting on a stone bench by the door holding a newspaper open in front of him, but not looking at it. Instead, he was looking right at me. He was tall and lanky with a scraggly unshaven face and greasy salt and pepper hair that was balding on the top. I told the adults, but they told me to brush it off and not to look at him because it would draw his attention. Yeah, like that hadn't already happened. I didn't want to seem unnerved, so I shot him a dirty look and kept walking behind my mom, with him not taking his eyes off me at all. Right before I stepped through the doors, I saw the man get up suddenly and head for the door, which I told my mom, but again she dismissed it. Inside, the lobby was packed wall to wall with people who were just standing around not doing anything. There weren't even any machines to play on in the lobby, so I don't understand why so many people were just standing around. There was a roped-off walkway so people could check in at the counter. The walkway was about 2 feet wide and kind of meandered around and through the throng of people, making lots of unnecessary turns. It was also very loud because everyone was talking at once. I'm telling you all this so you can better picture what happened next. I had only gone down the walkway a few feet when I felt the presence of someone behind me. Like when someone's close to you but not touching, how you can kind of feel them there. Anyway, I turn my head slightly and I see the creep's face mere inches from mine. I pick up the pace whilst trying not to panic and do something stupid. I get right behind my mom and started calling to her, trying to get her attention. She must have been annoyed with me because she didn't even glance back. Not for a long time. She kept on walking and I had no choice but to trail after her as fast as I could. I couldn't drop the suitcase and run because there was no space and I would have to climb over it and could not afford to stop. I could see in my peripheral vision that the creep had his hand hovering around the side of my head, ready to muffle my screams, and I bet if I had looked down I would have seen his other hand hovering, waiting to grab me. I couldn't look around me though, or do anything that could potentially slow me down. I knew that the moment I stopped he would take me. All I could do was keep moving forward as fast as I could while yelling, "Mom! Mom! Mom!" at the top of my lungs, like Stewie but more urgent. Think about that for a minute. Being 13 years old and about to be grabbed by some pervert who probably wants you for his child's sex ring. Being literally surrounded by people with no one noticing even though he's being obvious. And worst of all, being right behind your own mother who won't even turn around because she thinks you're just whining. I know for a fact she was thinking that way because I confronted her about it later. The whole event took less than 5 minutes, but it was the longest and scariest 5 minutes of my life. Finally, when it felt like my strength was about to give out, as we were approaching the check-in counter, Mom decided to turn around. At first she looked down at me over her shoulder, looking ready to tell me to shut the hell up. Then a split second later she looks behind me and does a 180 and stares the guy down like she's gonna rip his throat out. Which promptly causes him to do a 180 of his own and power walk his ass out of the building. After that, she yanked the suitcase out of my hands and shoved me forward, telling me I'm being too slow. Yeah, my mom was never the motherly type, to put it lightly. My mom reported the incident to the person at the counter, and the clerk said that they've had several complaints throughout the day about the same man. What the hell, LVPD? Anyway, we get to the room and all have a good cry about it, and Mom swears that she knew he was there the whole time and that she was only waiting for the right moment to confront him. Which I didn't buy at all, but was too shocked and emotional at the time to argue. Later, she admitted she thought I was complaining about having to carry the suitcase. The rest of the trip went great, but that event will always haunt me. These events happened when I was 9 through 14 years old. I'm 25 now, and female. My family had recently moved into a new home and I loved that house, but I've had the most terrifying paranormal experiences in my life there. It started with little things, like the feeling of being watched, to things turning up missing and showing up where I didn't leave them.
No.
And to my absolute horror, ripped a light on and looked around. All the other doors in the hall were closed and I found crazy. I completely work alone. Other than myself, there is one other EMT who works on nights that I don't. During the nights on the weekdays, we have a security guard who works with us from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. The other EMT I will call Travis, and I will call my security guard Marcus, just for their personal security. One night I had Marcus with me and we were walking the exterior of the community while checking on some of the company vehicles to see if they had been left accidentally unlocked. Marcus was standing closer to the street and was just staring down the road while I pulled on the door handles. Whenever we leave the front desk, we have an iPhone that belongs to the company that we take with us. That way we can still answer any potential calls during the night and to respond to life alerts that may come through from some of our residents while we were out doing whatever it may be. I had a couple of vehicles to check on, but before I could finish, a phone call comes through on the guard phone. 2 different numbers can pop up. If it is one certain number, it would mean that the call was coming from within the community, but if it was another number, then it meant that the call was coming from outside of the community. This number was the one that meant that it was coming from within the building, most likely a resident with a question or concern. I answer the phone and give the usual response. "Front desk, this is Matthew." No answer or noise from the other end. I assume that whoever was on the other end of the call simply didn't hear me. When you work in a retirement community, you get used to the odd quirks and mannerisms that come with dealing with them on a regular basis. I answered out on the phone again, but simply just said, "Hello?" but in a much larger voice, hoping that it would help someone with a hearing problem. Muffled, and then a soft static. I waited a few more seconds, and then I figured that it must have been an accident that they called me. So I simply hung up and assumed that they would call again if they needed me. And if it was an emergency, they had their life alert necklace with them. Within 5 seconds of hanging up the phone, I get another call that said it was coming from within the community again. I answer, "Front desk, this is Matthew." I hear a soft shuffle. I ask who it is and I get nothing but silence again. Even though there is no noise, I get the feeling that the phone is on speaker. Something about the way the phone static shifts is what I picked up on, and made me feel like I was speaking through speakerphone rather than just the simple receiver. I hang up after getting no response and got slightly irritated that someone could be messing with their phone. Before I put the phone back in my pocket, I get another call. I'm flat out annoyed at this point, and ignore my casual and cheery tone when I answer the phone and simply use a flat-toned inflection. "Front desk, it's Matthew." More static. I hang up before giving a second response and turn towards Marcus. "Hey, we need to head inside and switch the guard phone back to the desk phone so I can see who this is." The guard phone doesn't tell me what room is calling me, but if I go from the guard phone back to the front desk phone, the display tells me what exact room number is calling me. After I tell Marcus this, he continues to stare off down the street before nodding his head and agreeing. As we walk away from the vehicles and head back towards the front of the community, my phone continues to ring off the hook from the same number. I get increasingly annoyed with each phone call, while also getting more anxious to find out who it is. When we get about 40 feet away from the vehicles, Marcus leans slightly in and says, "I think we are being watched by someone on the corner of the road. He had a big white dog and we stared each other down while you were on the phone. I don't know if I'm overthinking it, but I just kept watching him to see if he would try anything." I just nodded my head and glanced back at the corner, to which I saw nobody there, and decided it was nothing. The area we were in had some group homes and condos nearby, so I'm not entirely surprised that someone could be outside about this time. A couple minutes later, we reached the front desk again. All the meanwhile, I keep getting repeat phone calls on the guard phone. I switch, pressing a few buttons to send the calls from the guard phone back to the front desk. Within seconds, the phone lights up and on the display I see, room 2026. And I pick up the phone. Finally having some answer, I regain my calm and answer with my usual friendly demeanor again. Front desk, this is Matthew. I get nothing aside from breathing or fabric friction from last time, and the silence in the background. Slightly disappointed I still didn't get any response, I switched the receiver back to the guard phone and grabbed my key ring and decided to go check out why they kept calling me. I told Marcus that we needed to go check on whoever was calling, and find out why they were calling. After working here for a while, you start to know who lives in what room. While walking through the halls and heading to the elevator to get to the second floor, I kept racking my brain to think of who lives in that room, all while the guard phone continues to ring again and again, while answering occasionally to see if it was a different resident. It never was. I get to the front door of room 2026, and I knock a few times and state, "It's the front desk. Is everything okay?" No response. The room had a nameplate next to it, which made me believe that someone had resided within there. I wasn't familiar with the name, so I knocked again and stated that if I didn't get a reply that I was going to come inside. I was still receiving phone calls on the guard phone, all while being outside the door. I waited 10 seconds before pulling out my master key and unlocking the door. I was unnerved when I opened the door completely. The room was entirely vacant. When you open the door, to the left is a kitchen and a living room, and to the right there was a hallway that had a bathroom, 2 bedrooms, and a closet. Marcus looked at me with a disturbed expression and said that he would wait outside, as he was too afraid to go in. I took out the guard phone and answered it while I was walking into the room. I still got no response, and I didn't even bother giving my greeting. Marcus let the door close, but not latch. I looked into the living room after switching on a kitchen light, and noticed that there was no landline plugged into the wall. I became increasingly afraid, and more anxious than ever. I stood still for a minute trying to make sense of it before I realized that the phone call had ended. But not by me. I took the phone away from my ear and looked at it, and as I expected, it rang again. I answered and walked around the apartment again. I went down the hall. While nearing one of the bedrooms, I started hearing more clearly over the phone. The questionable breathing turned into definite breathing. "Hello?" I said softly and curiously. I actually get what I believe is my first response from the number. It sounded like someone shooting air out of their nose, like when you see something funny on your phone, but instead of laughing, you just exhale a little harder. I walk into the first bedroom, and after opening the door, I get a big rush of cold air. I thought it was weird because the entire apartment only had one air conditioning unit tied to it, but it was obviously colder in this room. I left the door open and stepped inside while listening to the phone for more clues or potential breathing again. Without my knowledge, the phone call had ended again. Hovering my thumb where the answering button would be, I waited for it to call again, and it does within 5 seconds. I decided not to answer and just kept looking around the room. I get a cold shiver when I walked deeper inside the room and still didn't see anything, but the temperature feels at least 30 degrees less than what it was in the hallway, and it was oddly static. I can't properly explain it, but I never noticed it until I experienced it. It felt as if the air in the room was stiff and unmoving, as opposed to the air outside or in any other room for that fact, where it would normally be loose and generally normal. I grabbed the closet handle and slid the doors to the side to see if there was a phone or even a plug-in in the closet. There was nothing inside the closet, but after a couple of seconds of leaving the closet open, the phone stopped ringing and the air felt alive again. It still felt really cold, but it became less awkward to breathe it in. After connecting the dots in my head after a few seconds, my legs felt heavy as my spine began shivering with fear, and I walked out of the room and slammed the door behind me. Marcus could hear that the phone had suddenly stopped ringing and noticed that I had a stunned look on my face as I told him, "Go back to the desk." And we both hurried back. I explained to him exactly what had happened, and he began getting just as freaked out as I am. I ignored going to that floor again for the night. To solidify that I wasn't just crazy, I have Mario feel my shirt and hands so that he could notice how cold that room actually was compared to everywhere else I was. We didn't get any phone calls for the rest of the night, and still am a little freaked out that all the calls had ended. Whatever it was, I really hope it doesn't come back to that room again. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to yourmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like to help support the channel, I would highly recommend you check out the sponsor button. It's got a couple cool perks, and you will also get a channel badge. I will catch everyone in the next video, and if you know any service members, make sure you thank them. I hope everyone has a great day, and just remember,
Oh yeah, I
it's always
forgot like
scary
the sponsor
if it's
button
true.
now. What
Bye.
you can
I
sponsor
was in 5th grade when all this started. There were
YouTube
many events
videos
that
now.
happened for me when
It's
I was
pretty
in 5th
interesting.
grade to 8th grade, but I'm only going to talk about 2. Someone knocked on the door. Back then, my neighborhood was considered to be pretty safe. We never locked our doors because we never really had a reason to. So I went to the door and I opened it, but nobody was there. I honestly didn't think much of it. Probably one of my brother's friends or something. So I turned on the porch light and went outside. Once again, for as far as I could see, there was no one. I went back inside and sat in the living room to watch the house until my mom got home. A half an hour goes by and I'm still sitting on the couch which overlooks my kitchen, the kitchen window, and partly out into my backyard. Though at this time it was like 8 p.m., so it was fairly dark. With my head facing the left side of the room watching my show, I saw something dark flash by the window. It was quick, and it was only out of the corner of my eye, but there was something that flashed by the window. A few more minutes go by, and I'm texting my best friend Sam. I told her I thought someone might be trying to prank me or something, when I started to feel really uneasy, like someone was watching me. I look up and I shit you not, there was an outline of a person all in black in the fucking window. I just sat there, paralyzed, staring at him, and he lightly knocks on the window and does one of those close-fingered waves that you do to children before he disappears. In my head I was like, no fucking way that just happened. And even if it did, I was sure it was one of my brother's friends pranking me. But either way, I wasn't going to stay in the living room to just let them mess with me some more. I booked it up to my room and locked the door. My mom came home about 20 minutes later with my brother Harrison. I asked my mom if she saw anyone out there, and my brother if he intentionally had someone mess with me, but they both told me no. Harrison really wasn't the kind of person to do something like that, but I figured with it being so close to Halloween, anything was possible. I tried to put it out of my head, and that was that. For now. Some insight of what happened in between these two events. I'm fairly certain it wasn't my brother's friend. To this day, I still honestly don't know who it was, or what they really looked like, but after that day I started noticing someone in the backyard. They would just be standing there with black shoes, black pants, a black hoodie pulled up, black gloves, and I was never able to see his face, so I assume a black mask. Each time this happened, I would run to tell my mom, but by the time she got there, they were always gone. I started getting phone calls from an unknown number around that time too, of just silence, and occasional breathing, but nobody ever said anything. It only happened a few times, probably less than 20, but they would
Less
happen at
than
random
20?
times throughout the day and night, though mainly during light. For a long time I was the only one who actually ever saw this happening, because it pretty much always happened to me when I was home alone, or really late at night. Until one one day my mom, my neighbor, and I were on the porch talking, and I asked him if he ever saw anybody lingering around our backyard. My mom was quickly like, Mila, because I guess she didn't want me to sound crazy to the neighbor, since I kept saying all this was happening and she never saw the guy. I mean, she picked up the silent phone calls, but for some reason she never really believed me about the guy in the backyard. But to my surprise, he told me he did. He ended up telling my mom and I that he was sitting on his back porch, next to ours, with his girlfriend, when a man, all in black, came out from behind a tree. He started walking, and then running towards them. When my neighbor, who has a license to carry, pulled out his firearm and told the guy to stop running, the man didn't stop. Matt, the neighbor, shot at the ground and the guy finally stopped. He turned around and started running in the opposite direction, tripping over a branch and then getting up and disappearing. I felt so relieved.
Is that the damn thing? I'm like hearing like a phone or something.
Thinking that that had to be the guy, and that surely he'd never come back. But of course, that's not how it happened. Now, before I get back into it, let me explain. My mom didn't frequently leave me home alone. A lot of the time I was left with my brother, who was 7 years older than me, or a family member. But there were a few times where my mom had to work, went shopping, or went out and I would elect to stay home on my own rather than tag along or go somewhere else. So on this night, I was home alone once more. I was in the living room, and because things had sort of died down a bit with the man in the backyard, I felt comfortable enough to sit in my living room and watch some TV again. This time I can't remember what I was watching, but just like the first time, something black flashed by the window. At this point I was like, nuh-uh, this can't be happening again. And I didn't immediately want to call my mom and ruin her night if it turned out to be not that big of a deal. So I just stared intently at the window, just waiting for him to pop out like he did last time. During what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, I had muted my TV. There was an eerie silence like in those action movies where they're like, it's quiet, too quiet. At that moment I could probably hear a pin drop. But instead I began to hear my back door rattle slightly. My heart dropped and started racing. It felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. They were trying to break down the door. From where I was, whoever was at the back door couldn't see me. As I heard my back door being broken into, my fight or flight response must have kicked in and I grabbed my phone, unlocked my front door, and hauled ass across the street. I started bawling my eyes out as I ran down some random side streets and alleyways to get as far away from my house as possible. I ended up sitting under a lamplight, pretty much on the other side of town. I called my mom and her boyfriend Kyle, but they could barely understand me as I was blabbering so much. When I was finally able to calm down, I explained to them what had happened and where I was, and they immediately came and picked me up. In the car, I felt so much safer. Kyle was a big guy. He did construction. He had muscle and he was a scary dude if you didn't know him. When we got home, Kyle went in first. He told us to stay in the car, and from inside the house he yelled out that the back door was wide open. He went room to room, floor to floor of our house, searched the backyard, shed, everything, but whoever it was gone. My mom later tried to comfort me and say maybe it was our cat, but we both know that it wasn't the cat. Our back door is pretty hard to get into, and it was wide open. I saw the guy in our yard a few times after that, always just standing there in one spot, and I started sleeping with the knife secretly tucked away by my bed, but eventually he stopped coming around. It took a while, but he did, and luckily nothing like that ever happened again. I think it's also very important to add that nothing had been stolen from the house that night. There were no drawers open, and the door to the basement is right across from the back door. It's often kept open and it had some pretty expensive equipment down there, but it wasn't even touched. So because nothing from my house was taken, we didn't call the cops. Because like I said, for a long time my mom didn't believe me, and once she did we had no evidence, and it eventually just stopped anyway. To this day I have no idea what the man wanted, or why he tried to break into my house, but my mind continues to come up with some ideas. I was only 10 or 11 years old at the time it all started, and I was probably around 12 or 13 when he tried to break in. Both times I was home alone. I'm almost 20 now, and although I don't really think about it too much anymore, I still always find myself watching the window in the back door of my house. Sometimes I still get that eerie feeling when I'm home alone. This is the point of view of myself, Dad, and my sister. This was about 2 years ago when I was 16. It was Monday morning, around 6 a.m. My dad, 2 sisters, and myself were at home sleeping, while my mom was out at the gym. My sister had heard someone ringing the doorbell. She was about to get up and answer it when she heard my dad's footsteps heading towards the door, so she went back to sleep. That's when she heard my dad's footsteps go from walking to pacing back and forth around the house. She heard my dad talking to the cops, saying that someone was on our front lawn and asking if they could come get him. Fast forward to almost an hour and a half later, and that's when I woke up to my dad screaming. At first I was thinking that my parents were fighting, but then I heard a window break from my parents' room. That's when I got up from my bed, got a bat and went out. And just as I was getting out of my room and my dad was closing his door to his room, I saw this huge guy, he reminded me of Mr. T, climbing inside through the window. As my dad was shutting the door, he put his feet up against a file cabinet we have, and his back towards the door with a katana samurai sword in his hand, avid knife and sword collector, keeping the guy out of the rest of the house. While my dad was doing this, he was saying to the 911 operator that this was the 3rd time he had called the cops, and nobody had shown up, and the guy was inside our house. I told my dad to give me the phone because I was a little bit more calm, and I answered the questions of the operator. That's when the guy started pushing against the door trying to get through, and my dad told me to get back and protect my sister if the guy happened to get through. So I did. Luckily, the madman stopped pushing the door and the cops at last got there. 2 cops went inside the room with tasers drawn and told the man to get on the floor. He just looked at them and started walking towards them, and that's when the cops fired their tasers, and all the guy did was look at the darts and say, "Ow," and then proceeded to take them off. In the end, the cops were able to take him down and get him in cuffs. The cops told us he might have been on PCP and was just looking for a place to sleep because he had only his shoes and shorts on. What my dad had told us afterwards was that the man had opened the side door and went around back and went inside the dog's house to sleep. We used to have a big husky before he passed, and then afterwards got my scooter I had left outside and smashed my parents' window. He climbed in and got my mom's iPad and went on YouTube looking at the most popular videos. My mom got home to a scene of 6 squad cars and 2 fire trucks outside of the house. What's crazy is that my dad was going to go to the gym as well, but he got lazy and slept in. I don't know what would have happened if my dad wasn't there, but I am grateful he was. Also glad the man didn't break in through the front, because then we would have had to fight the guy since he would have been near my sister's room. When they were taking him out, the cops and paramedics saw that the guy was too big to fit the gurney, so they told him he was going to have to walk, and he says, "Oh man, you gonna make me walk?" I don't know exactly what happened to him afterwards. First, I would like to say that this is still going on, and I will keep updating as more stuff goes on. I'm a female, mid-20s, and currently living in an old rundown apartment complex. I'm stuck here until I can afford another since I have no family where I am. I moved into my apartment when I was 19 for college, and this was a great opportunity for me to be on my own since my parents could be smothering at times. My dad was concerned about me since I showed him and my mom photos of the apartment building. He mentioned that it looked sketchy and I should come home. I didn't want to go home, and my dad had issues letting me leave since we are close, but I promised him I would keep in touch. I do wish I would have listened to him and went home after what happened during my first week at the apartment. Getting out of my car with my luggage, this was the first time I was checking into my very own place. At first, from the outside, the apartment complex looked decent, and I was surprised the rent was not that much. Walking inside the lobby area, I could already see this place needed fixing up inside. Both of the elevators were broken, and the landlord was horrifying to even look at. He looked about mid-50s, greasy hair, and an overweight beer belly that he was not afraid of showing off to people. All around, he was someone that you would not want to be around. Of course, he welcomed me and showed me all the amenities in the apartment, but I couldn't help but notice every few minutes he would look me over. He would say something like, "We don't have many pretty ladies coming here. I am pleased to know you picked this place out. Don't worry about safety. I'm the only person with a key to the doors in this complex."
Oh, great.
That was not comforting at all. In fact, it was horrifying and I wanted to leave fast. But my money was already tied into the place and I didn't want to lose my deposit. I acted like I was paying attention, but now my body was tense and feeling really uncomfortable. His voice broke my thoughts. "Come with me. I will show you to your room." I prayed he wouldn't put me on the top floor because of the elevators being broken. My suitcase weighed a ton and I really didn't want to take the stairs. There were 5 floors to this apartment complex, and of course he placed me on the 5th. He started to go up the stairs, but he was waiting for me. The prick didn't even help me with my luggage, but maybe that was good since I didn't want his sweaty hands to touch me. I could see his jaw tense as he eyed me and reached his hand out to take one of my suitcases. "Here, precious, let me take one of those suitcases for you." I told him no, and that I could handle it. We managed to make our way to the room and he unlocked the door and opened it, letting me inside first. At first glance, the place was surprisingly decent. It was self-furnished since I didn't have the money to get furniture for the place. The room was nice too. It was a 1-bedroom with a kitchen and living room combined. It was like a small studio apartment. I noticed there were a few cracks on the wall, and the carpet looked like it needed to be replaced. Once I got my keys from him and the creepy landlord left, I started to unpack. It took me 4 hours to bring all of my boxes from my car to my room and fully make myself comfortable. I was proud to have my very own place, even with the creepy landlord. School started in a week, and it was close to my college, so it was beneficial for me too. The first 3 days in my apartment, everything seemed fine, except at night I would hear weird noises coming from the walls next to my room, which shows me that my neighbor was making a lot of noise. The sound was like a drill running, and it occurred around 2 in the morning. You'd think people would have respect for others, but I had a job interview coming up and I needed the sleep. I got out of bed, slipped on my slippers, and left my room to go to my neighbor's. I've never met any of my neighbors, and there weren't too many people living in the small apartment complex. I approached the door and knocked a few times. I could hear rumbling from the door as if the person was surprised to have someone knocking on their door. When the door opened, I was greeted with one disturbing sight that is forever going to be burned in my mind. The man that lived in the apartment was completely nude with his junk hanging out. I nearly cringed, as this guy looked like 40 years old and stunk as if he didn't shower. You could even see dirt on his skin. I stuttered for a moment. Did he not have enough decency to cover himself? But by his smug look, it seemed like he didn't care. "What can I help you with, love?" he says. I spoke softly, keeping my gaze on his face with his already missing teeth. "Sorry to bother you, but I'm trying to sleep and I can hear drilling coming from your room. It's kind of keeping me up. Could you please keep the noise down?" He was rubbing his stomach as if he was still trying to get turned on, and he chuckled while he reached out his hand to touch my shoulder. I moved back. "I'm sorry, love. I was just fixing some things up in my room. I promise not to be loud."
He made holes, didn't he?
"So have you been here long? I don't think I've seen any lovely ladies like you around." He had a deep voice, almost like a smoker with a wheezing tone, and I started to wonder if this guy was maybe a sex offender or just some kind of creep. I didn't want to know his name, or go into his apartment as he invited me to come in. I just moved in the complex a couple days ago. I'm sorry I bothered you, but I need to leave. It was, nice to meet you, I said. I quickly left, going back to my room in desperate need of a shower after seeing what I did. The guy was a creep, eyeing me like I was some kind of piece of meat. This was going to be one long year since my contract was for 12 months. Going back to sleep, I still felt uneasy, not sure why the guy would be drilling in his wall at 2 in the morning. I watch horror movies, so you can imagine what was running through my head. Another week went by and I just started school. I am part of the swimming team at my college, so I was just coming out of practice as I headed inside my apartment complex, and noticed the creepy landlord staring at me in my bathing suit. I couldn't help but wrap myself with my jacket. Hello. How was practice? I must say that suit does not do you justice. He smiled, showing off his yellow teeth. I didn't want to be rude, so I smiled my thanks, and wasted no time heading up to my room to change and work on my homework. After finishing up my assignments, I needed to go to the laundry room to wash my clothes. I walked to the laundry room, unloaded my clothes, and found myself a seat and began texting my parents. About an hour after I put my clothes in the dryer, my neighbor came in with a Cheshire cat grin like from Alice in Wonderland. Hello again, beautiful. I didn't quite get your name. I'm David. I didn't want to give him my real name since he reminded me of one of those creepers who want to take children in a van with candy. Vanessa. He smiled, putting his clothes in the washer as his eyes trained on me. I seen that new top you bought. It's quite striking on you. I froze. How the hell did he know what I had on in my own room? Now I started to feel very uncomfortable. How do you know about my new top? You walked out with it on. That was not true. I never walked out with my new top on. Being in that room was like time stopped. I prayed for my clothes to be done so I could leave. How the hell could he see me? Then my thoughts went to the drilling I heard a few nights before. Once my clothes were done, I quickly got them folded and left for my room. After putting my clothes away, I started to feel on my walls near my bedroom. I watch far too many horror movies, so I was becoming paranoid. Moving my hands along the wall, I felt a small hole, probably the size of a nail, and I could see through to his apartment just barely. But that meant he could see me as well. I took my phone out and called my dad, explaining to him what was going on. He demanded that I come home, but I didn't tell him about the hole because I knew he would drag me home if he had to. Instead, my dad said he would fly to come check on me and spend the week with me. Upon hanging up the phone, I took a photo of the living room area and covered the hole with it. I went to the landlord the next day and demanded a new room, or at least for him to do something about the man. He told me, "Oh, it was just an accident, but we will talk to him." The guy didn't even care, but he almost seemed like he envied the idiot who thought it was smart to peep. I will keep you guys informed about what happens next. I know this guy is not going to leave me alone, and I hope to never catch him peeping into my room. I did go out and buy a taser and pepper spray just in case though. I'll start by saying I live in a bad neighborhood full of crime and drugs. The cops are on my street a lot and monitor it regularly. There have been quite a few breaking and enterings, mainly junkies looking for money or items to get a fix. I never imagined my house would be a target. Last night my friend had left, so I did my nightly routine of checking on my son, locking up the doors, and getting ready for bed. My door has 2 chain locks, and I locked the doorknob. I also have an alarm. I had just laid down and looked at my security camera that showed my front porch and front door. I saw 3 guys in hoodies walk up on my porch. I asked my husband if he's expecting someone, because it's not uncommon for friends or neighbors to come by, and he tells me he isn't. The one guy tries to open my door that I literally locked 2 minutes prior. Before I could get up and have a chance to react, the guy that tried to open my door then steps back when he realizes it's locked and kicks my front door open. The frame of the door that my chain locks are on ripped off the wall. My alarm goes off and the guys take off running. I didn't get a chance to see them as I was frantically looking for a weapon. I don't know who they were and why they kicked in my door. I can't imagine what would have happened if they had come in and done something, especially since my son was right upstairs. Needless to say, I did not sleep well that night, and I hope they don't decide to come back. A bit of backstory. I'm a 29-year-old female. A couple of years ago, my 23-year-old cousin moved in with me, though this happened a couple years ago, making us 27 and 21 at the time. My cousin and I are known for taking late-night walks to the 7-Eleven. When I say late-night walks, I mean somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m. On the night in question, we were suffering an epic case of insomnia, and were pretty bored. We had just gotten paid that night, so we thought, what the hell? Let's go on one of our late-night trips to the store. It was a cool night, as it was in late winter when this happened. We started walking and talking about where our lives were currently headed, laughing at the ridiculousness of our frustrations with various things as we did. My cousin and I have always been super close, more like brother and sister. The walk to the store was pretty uneventful, but we got there with no problems, figured out what we wanted, paid, and left. About a block into our walk home, my cousin tells me he wants to stop for a minute to adjust the bags as they were giving him a hard time. I stopped and waited for him to get them together again. As we continued on to finish our last little bit of our walk, he says to me in a soft voice, "I didn't need to adjust the bags. I just wanted to find out for sure if the dude behind us was following us." He tells me to act normal, but pick up the pace a little and have my keys out. I do so. My cousin then goes on to tell me that this really shifty dude had been trailing us since we left the store. Once again, he decides to test the guy. He decided to take a bit of a detour for a while. Sure enough, the guy is never far behind. I begin to hear his footfalls at this point, making the situation all too real for me. It's at this point I start becoming concerned. Not scared, just creeped out at the possibilities of what this asshole could want with us. I never carry my purse at night, so I had no idea why he deems us fitting targets. But the creepiest part is yet to come. As we arrive back home, the guy is still on our asses. My cousin tells me to quickly go inside and lock the door and wait for him to come back in. I've never seen my cousin this worked up, so it was at this point that the fear started to creep in. I quickly darted inside, slammed and deadbolted the door, waiting in the stairwell for my cousin. He comes back in a minute later and tells me the worst part yet. He said that when he went outside to confront the guy, he left when he saw that only my cousin came out, not me. It was as if this jerk was waiting for me to come out by myself without the protection of my cousin, who was more than physically able to handle himself if shit got real. Once he saw my cousin come out alone, the guy started walking off. This is the part that scares me. The fact that the dude was obviously after me. The possibilities of what he wanted to do to me are endless. We still go on our night walks on occasion, though not as often as I've recently gotten married and my husband now lives with us. I'd love to see that asshole try this shit now. I'm not gonna let him change who I am or what I do. And I still love the night. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine asked me to take him some stuff to Houston because of the flooding. His house was fine, but his neighborhood was not, and he was unable to get needed essentials. I agreed to do it even though I lived 18 hours away because I love a good road trip. It was 2 days of driving and I had just crossed the Texas state line. My legs were cramping really bad, so I stopped at the first rest area I came to. I needed to stretch because I couldn't drive like that, especially with so many hours left. I ran in to use the bathroom, and as I was heading out of the building, a man was holding the door for me. I was walking incredibly slow to get to the door because of my cramping legs, but because he continued to hold it, I sped up and did a little jog. I thanked him and we both walked out. He was a truck driver, and I was also driving a truck that I parked in the big truck parking. I only had a small trailer attached, but parking with the big rigs was just easier. I guess I don't look like a truck driver because this man was acting very nervous with me trailing behind him. Again, my legs were cramping, so I had to walk slow. He kept looking around to check and see if I was still behind him, and I thought I'd stop and do a little stretching because I could tell he was really nervous, but I have never had anyone get that scared around me before. As we started leaving the sidewalk and entering the parking lot, he was clearly very agitated. I was hoping he'd walk to a truck that was away from mine, because he was so nervous I didn't know what he was going to do. But of course he was parked right next to me. As I walked behind him, he started to speed up his pace. He ran the few remaining feet to his door and quickly unlocked it while looking at me. He locked his doors and watched me like I had something planned for him. I jumped into my truck and sped away. I don't know why he was so afraid of me. Maybe he had a dead hooker in the back seat. I'm a proud Floridian. At the time of this story in the early 2000s, I was going to college in South Florida and lived with my family in my hometown in the Florida Panhandle. It's about a 7-hour drive up through Central Florida to get between the two places, so I mostly just went home for the holidays. It was the Thanksgiving of my junior year, and I was excited that I had managed to rearrange my midterms to be able to leave the campus 3 days ahead of everyone else. I was expected to beat the masses of traffic and was hoping for a quick trip back home. My roommates wanted to have our last meal together before we all left on break, so I ate in the campus dining hall around 4 p.m., and I set off on my journey around 5:30 p.m. Around 10 p.m. I had just passed my 2/3 mark, where I always stopped at this little mom-and-pop type of diner by the side of the highway to grab a snack, use the restroom, and call my dad to let him know I was okay. I didn't have a cell phone yet. Well, I hadn't been there since summer, and the place was out of business. A little bummed out that I wouldn't get my chocolate chip pancakes, I just kept going. There really wasn't much built up around there at that time, so when I saw the signs for a rest stop in, of all places on God's green earth, some bumfuck town called Alucia, I went for it. I went and parked directly under the streetlight for safety, and used the facilities, called my dad, etc. I didn't see anyone else there, except for a very exhausted-looking woman who approached me asking for directions, saying she was with her husband and 2 small children from Virginia and they made a wrong turn on their way to get to Disney. So I left the rest area and was walking back to my car when I noticed a beat-up, unmarked, gray or bluish work van parked extremely close to the driver's side of my '95 Honda Civic. I thought that was pretty weird. It had Florida tags on it, so it couldn't have been the ladies I just talked to in the bathroom. I distinctly remembered she said she was from Virginia. I turned around and hightailed it back to the rest stop, promptly running into some random middle-aged guy with 2 little boys. Getting to talk to him, it turned out it was his wife I had spoken to, as she emerged from a bathroom seconds later, and I felt comfortable speaking to him. I told him what was going on with the van, and how I didn't know what to do. He said he'd go check it out. He left the kids with his wife and strutted up to the driver's side of the van. He stood there for a moment before speaking. His voice awkwardly quivered, but we could hear him yell it from where we were standing some 100 feet away. "Excuse me, gentlemen, we already called the police, so I'm going to have to politely suggest that you get out of here." And then he ran back at us, grabbing his wife and kids, pointing to me with a swift, "You," and said, "Come on, let's get in the car now." And we ran, together. So there I was sitting confused in the back of this stranger's SUV, while he went and used the payphone to presumably call the police. Meanwhile, the van peeled out of there. Like, I have never seen someone get the fuck out of there quite like they got the fuck out of there. They ran up on the curb on their way out. They burned rubber. It was almost comical. The cops got there and I found out what happened. The man went to go check out the van, and he could see it pretty well because I had parked under the streetlight. The first thing he noticed was that all of the seats except for the driver's seat had been removed. There was a guy sitting in the driver's seat, and a guy sitting in the back, a tarp laid out in the back, and a bunch of other random items back there that he couldn't immediately identify. Neither of the guys were reading a newspaper or a map or anything. They were apparently both just sitting there. It makes me sick thinking about it. I'm a male nurse at a large hospital in San Francisco. I work in the ER, and as is custom Thanksgiving night, it was very busy. My wife is also a nurse for the same hospital. She works in labor and delivery. Between babies being born left and right and other people coming into the ER, we hadn't had a chance to take a break together as we try to do every shift. So when she called, I figured it was to say she wanted to meet up for a bit to eat in the cafeteria. When I answered, I heard a male voice screaming profanities in the background, and my wife, who was fluent in Spanish, trying to calm this guy down. She told me their pager wasn't working and that they needed security stat. I quickly hung up, called security, told my fellow nurses what was going on, and ran for labor and delivery, worried sick about my wife. When I got there, I almost ran smack dab into this visibly angry man. He wasn't huge, but bro definitely worked out, and not at a gym. He was covered in prison tattoos and was obviously a banger. I work out regularly, but I knew this guy could kick my ass. He looked at me, gave me this sick grin, and then started heading towards me, spouting off in Spanish. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but what I did understand scared the living shit out of me. I'm backing up as fast as I can. I start buzzing on the door to the ER frantically for them to let me in. This guy's literally a foot away from me, and the door opens and I'm pulled into safety by a doctor. Gangbanger punches the door a few times, making a dragging sign across his throat while grinning at us. Next thing I know, the police rush into the corridor he's in, and it takes 2 security officers and 2 cops to subdue this guy. I finally make it to my wife, who thankfully was shaken up but unhurt. She explained to me what happened. A young girl, only 14, came in, high fever, vomiting, distending belly. The banger claimed he was her brother, and they needed to cut her open to get the baby. They did an ultrasound, and to their horror, they realized she wasn't pregnant. She had bags of drugs in her stomach. It's very common for drug mules to bring over young women from Mexico carrying drugs that way. Homeboy freaked out when they informed him his sister needed emergency surgery, and he wasn't getting his drugs. Thankfully, the girl survived. But the sad thing is she's most likely going to be deported once she recovers. I was driving back to my college from my family's house after Thanksgiving break. I was traveling through a rural area in the Midwest when I suddenly had the urge to pee badly. I was reading all the road signs I came across to see if there was a nearby town that I could stop at and find a gas station or something to use their restrooms. Unfortunately, the nearest town was 30-ish miles away, and I had to pee so badly. It was unbearable.
It's piss off.
I finally made the decision to get off at the next exit that I found, even though they don't lead to any towns. Shortly after I pulled off on the next exit, I came across a gravel road. I thought this was perfect because I didn't have to get in trouble for exposing myself in front of anybody. It was a very private road. Just so you all are aware, I am a female. It is very difficult for females to pee on the side of the road.
Oh, yeah.
I thought the best course of action would be to just take my empty McDonald's cup and pee into that. I did just that, inside my car, just in case anyone drove down the lonely road. I had just finished my business and was dumping the cup. I did not litter, only dumped the contents into the grass on the side of the road. I was starting my car and getting ready to turn my car around back the way I came when I saw a bright red car speeding down the road I was on. It startled me, but they drove right on past. I thought to myself, must be the locals out messing around. I started to drive off, and I saw a dingy, rusted red pickup truck coming down the road after the car. They too drove past me. As they passed, I saw 2 male passengers who were staring straight at me. This freaked me out, but I told myself all the more reason to get a move on. I still kept my eye on the pickup truck though, and I saw them turning around coming straight at me.
Fuck.
This freaked me out so much I decided the best course of action would be to drive in their direction, continuing on the gravel road, as opposed to turning around and giving them the opportunity to chase after me. I drove right by them and saw that they were grinning at me. I was so scared I hit the gas, which on a gravel road doesn't do much good. I finally got a grip on the road and headed along the gravel. I looked in my rearview mirror and they were following me again. I was freaked out. My hands were shaking, my foot was flooring the accelerator, and I reached for my phone. I'm not the person to call 911 in just any situation. In fact, I was scared to call 911 because I was afraid I was just being paranoid. But as I looked in my rearview mirror again and saw them gaining on me, I called the police. When I called the police, the operator picked up and I explained to her what was happening. During this phone call, the men in the pickup truck were so close that I couldn't see their front tires. I was sliding all over the gravel road, trying to stay on the phone with the operator. She was giving me directions to the nearest town several miles away. They followed me the entire way there, all the way until I reached the police station. I saw them turn around very quickly because they knew I was out of their reach. I definitely learned a lesson from this, and I think from now on I'll stick to peeing in public restrooms. This all took place in November of last year. I booked an entire trip in order to propose to my then girlfriend. Flew us both out to Florida to go to Disney World, the last concert of one of our favorite bands, Berlin, and of course propose. We had a blast. I proposed in the Disney castle. She said yes. Everything went well. We took off the next morning, Thanksgiving Day, on the way home, connecting through San Francisco. About 30 minutes into the flight, the captain comes over the intercom and announces that one of our engines wasn't depressurizing properly. We do a loop back to the airport and get unloaded into the terminal as we await another plane to be ready. My now fiancée switched her phone back from airplane mode, and within a minute she has 10 plus voicemails all from the same number, which she didn't know. Fearing the worst, we called the numbers without listening to any of the voicemails. I knew something was wrong as soon as she started talking to them. Her face went blank and she didn't say a word. I told her to give me the phone and she did. I asked who it was, then the voice I heard back just sounded dead. Absolutely no hint of emotion in it. All he said was, "I will kill you both as soon as you land in Seattle." I asked who he was again and he just hung up. She said she had no idea who it was, and I certainly didn't know the voice. I called him back, and he would answer, and just repeat the time that we were landing. Little did he know we were delayed for hours. I used to work in telecom, and I pulled some strings to get a name and address from the phone number that he used. Neither of us knew the name, nor the address. She looked him up on Facebook and saw that she had one mutual friend with him. Her ex-best friend. We'll call her Karen. That she was no longer friends with as she had gotten wrapped up in heavy drug usage and stole from my fiancé. We did a little more digging around and found out that he was the boyfriend of Karen's new best friend. My theory is Karen saw all of the posts my fiancé was posting on social media about the trip, the engagement, and the great time we were having, and she was pissed and wanted to piss on our parade. I didn't take it as a joke, however. A death threat is a death threat, and in my mind as meth heads they could follow through with it on a whim. I called him and talked over his rambling and told him I was armed, knew where he lived, and was not afraid to take things into my own hands. He hung up on me, so I called the Seattle area law enforcement, and they told me to call back on a non-holiday. So I called the emergency line, and they reiterated the same statement.
Are you
We were
serious?
on our own. We ended up flying in close to 9 hours after our original arrival time. Once we landed, we both had a single voicemail. Hers I assumed was from the guy, and mine I had no idea, as he hadn't been calling on my phone. My voicemail was from my dad, who said he had gotten a call from my neighbor saying that my mailbox had been destroyed. Looked into it and it had been hit by a car and the mail stolen from it. Her voicemail, however, was the guy screaming, "Where were you? How dare you?" and plenty of other threats and random yelling. I drove home and dropped off my fiancée at her house, insisting she not come with me to my place in case there was someone still there. They threw a brick through my window with an old picture of my fiancée and Karen attached to it. I tried to call him, to no answer. I went to bed after covering up the window with a tarp and making sure my fiance was okay. I filed a police report the next day. They said I couldn't do anything without seeing them on my property.
Ah, man.
We blocked everyone involved on social media
Not him.
and went about our lives. I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks, and he sent a picture of my fiance working. I immediately called her and told her to get to the back of her work, a bubble tea shop. I then called mall security to explain the situation, but by the time they got to the food court, where the picture was taken from, he was gone. At this point, I was done messing around. I knew his address, and swung by and dropped off a note attached to a critical defense .40 bullet, saying, "This is your last chance to leave her alone. This is your only warning." It's been almost 9 months now. Haven't heard a word or seen them again. Luckily, this story doesn't involve me being chased, almost kidnapped, stalked, etc. But it is still one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. I think about what happened from time to time, and sometimes I feel as though maybe I was overreacting. But then I remember how I felt like my stomach was in my throat and my heart was going to burst out of my chest, and I know that my fear was justified. I never told my parents or the parents of the kids I was babysitting, which, looking back, was probably really stupid. This happened when I was about 14. I had just started babysitting for this family in my neighborhood. They had 2 kids, a boy who was at the time 10, and a girl who was at the time 8. They were great kids to babysit. They got along with each other without fighting, and always did what I asked them without complaining. Before I launch into what happened, I'm going to give you all some background information about the family's house, so that y'all can understand why I was so freaked out. The house is situated pretty far back in my neighborhood on this little side street off the main road that runs through the neighborhood. The house is in a cul-de-sac, so there's not a lot of traffic on the road at all. Usually, the only people that ever come into the cul-de-sac are the mailman and the people who live in the other 3 houses that were in the cul-de-sac. The street itself was not very long at all, so there were only 3 houses on each side of the street that weren't in the cul-de-sac. Essentially, despite being in a very large neighborhood, the street that this house was situated on was very quiet, and if you didn't live in the neighborhood, you might not even know that this street existed. It was a fall Friday night. Pretty sure it was in late November, right after Thanksgiving, and I arrived at the house around 6. The kids were already sitting down eating dinner when I got there, and the parents told me that they expected to be home around midnight or so. The parents also made a joke about how the kids had the whole street to themselves, since the other families that lived there were out of town for Thanksgiving. The parents left, the kids finished eating, and we went outside to play in the cul-de-sac. I remember locking the front door and taking my house key outside with me. The kids rode around on their scooters for about an hour. For some reason, I just felt really on edge while the kids were playing outside. I chalked this feeling up to knowing that we were alone on the street since everyone else was out of town. After the kids finished playing outside, we went inside to play on the Wii in the basement. I remember locking the front door once we were back inside, and putting the key on the kitchen counter. I then checked the front door again before I went down into the basement. I was super vigilant about checking the doors, because I had watched so many scary movies where the babysitter forgets to lock the door, and then some crazy murderer gets into the house and blah blah blah. As the kids are playing in the basement, I get that unsettling feeling again. I didn't feel like we were being watched. It was more like when you know that something is going to pop out in a scary movie, and you're just anticipating it on the edge of your seat. The feeling sticks with me the entire time we're in the basement. But again, I chalk it up to knowing that the entire street is empty. The clock strikes 10 and it's time for the kids to head to bed. We go to the top floor of the house where the kids' bedrooms are. The house is set up so when you open the front door of the house to come inside, you're standing in the foyer, with the stairs to go up to the top floor directly in front of you. If you're standing in the foyer, you can see all the way up the stairs into the bedroom on the top floor. So the kids are in the bathroom brushing their teeth, and we all hear a car pull in their driveway. I figure it's their parents coming home super early, and I expected to hear the garage door start opening. But that sound never comes. I walk into the girl's bedroom and look out their front window. There's a car running in the driveway, and there's a man in the car, but the headlights are turned off despite it being 10 p.m. and pitch black outside. I figured it was just someone who was lost in our neighborhood and was just using the driveway to stop and get their bearings before heading back out on the main road. I leave the girl's bedroom and head back into the bathroom where the kids were. Suddenly, I hear a knock on the front door. I turn around and there's a man standing at their door holding a pizza box. There are 2 long windows on either side of the front door, so I have a clear view of this guy, and I know he has a clear view of us. I immediately get that eerie feeling that I had been feeling all night. I asked both the kids if they had ordered a pizza for some reason, and they both said no. These kids were always very honest, and wouldn't lie about something like that, or even order a pizza without asking me, so I knew they were being truthful. Normally, I would have gone downstairs to see what this guy wanted. Maybe he had the wrong house and I could point him in the right direction. But that little voice in my head was screaming, "Do not go downstairs. Do not open that door." The guy also didn't look like he worked for any pizza company. Normally they would wear a uniform or a hat with the company's logo on it, or something. This guy just seemed off. He looked like he was in his late 30s, early 40s, and looked super disheveled. His shirt was really wrinkled, his pants were filthy and ripped, and he had this ratty black baseball cap that was pulled down super far so his eyes were covered. He was also grinning really aggressively. Like I thought this guy's teeth would just shatter because of how hard he was pressing them together. At this point the kids notice him and start asking why he's here, should we open the door, etc. I tell them no and ask them to just go to their rooms and lie down. The boy goes to his room, and I walk the girl into her room and look out the window at the car again. I notice the car doesn't have one of those pizza delivery car signs on top, which all of the pizza companies in my town required drivers to have. So now I really feel confident in my initial intuition that this guy isn't a legit pizza delivery guy. The girl gets in bed, and I come back out of her room and sit at the top of the stairs so that I can keep an eye on this guy. I tried to stay calm so as to not upset the kids, even though I was flipping out on the inside. He's still standing at the door holding the pizza box in one hand, and he's still grinning that teeth-shattering grin. His mouth almost looks too big for his face. Even though I can't see his eyes because of the hat, I know that he's dead-ass staring at me. Then, without breaking eye contact, he starts jiggling the door handle pretty aggressively, while still grinning. I silently thank God that I was so psychotic about making sure the front door was locked. He stops jiggling the handle and resumes staring at me. If I was in this situation now, I probably would have called the police immediately. But being only 14 and fairly new to babysitting, I was paralyzed with fear. I felt like if I took my eyes off him for even a second, when I looked back, he would be standing at the base of the stairs. After about another 5 minutes of the stare down, he literally starts walking backwards off their porch without breaking eye contact. Legit, this dude was walking backwards towards his car while staring at me. I go into the parents' bedroom, which also has a view of the driveway, kneel down in front of the window, and peek out. I'm expecting to see the guy getting into his car. Nope, the guy is nowhere in sight, but the car is still there. So I return to my perch at the top of the stairs, half expecting to see him at the door again, or worse, standing at the bottom of the stairs. But he was nowhere to be seen. After about 20 minutes, I hear a car starting. I run back to the parents' bedroom, kneel in front of the window again, and notice that the car in the driveway has started and the guy is sitting in the driver's seat, still fucking grinning. He also doesn't turn the headlights on. He shifts into reverse and begins backing slowly out of the driveway, grinning the entire time. Right before he drives off, he turns his head, and I swear to God makes direct eye contact with me. Again, I can't see his eyes because of the hat, but I know that he was looking at me. This is really disturbing to me, since he really didn't know where I was in the house. The parents' bedroom is the furthest down to the right if you're looking at the house from outside. The lights in the parents' bedroom are off, and I'm kneeling down. So really the only part of me that might potentially be visible is the top of my head, my eyes, and my nose. But it's also pitch black outside. He doesn't have his headlights on, and it's pitch black in the parents' bedroom. So I doubt that I was really visible. He also didn't spend time scanning the windows. His head literally just snapped to where I was. It's like he could sense where I was. After I had time to calm down and collect myself, I started replaying what had happened and came to the following conclusions. This guy was not a pizza delivery guy.
No shit.
He had no uniform, looked and acted like he was possessed or something, and his car was unmarked. Those 20 minutes or so that elapsed between when he was walking backwards off the porch to when he got into the car were probably spent walking around the house and checking all of the doors, trying to gain entry. He had malicious intent. Maybe he was there to rob the house. Maybe he wanted to do something more sinister to me and the kids. Either way, this guy was bad news, and I'm glad that I trusted the voice in my head. I think he probably found some pizza delivery box and tried to pose as a pizza delivery guy to get me to open the door to him so he could strike. I was on my way to drop off a load from Oklahoma City to West Oklahoma. I was hauling an expensive load of appliances. It was around 7 p.m. I was in the middle of nowhere when I noticed smoke under my hood and my truck was overheating. I noticed a very isolated gas station about a quarter of a mile down the road. I let my truck just coast over and pulled up to a large dirt parking lot and was trying to figure out what it was when I noticed it was my water hose that was blown and it was leaking out my water. Now it was pushing 9 p.m. I had been working under the overheated truck for the last 2 hours trying to figure out what was going on. I had grease on almost every part of my body and I was trying to clean myself with tap water behind the gas station. All of a sudden I noticed a very large man walking towards me very slowly, and when I looked at him he immediately slowly started backing up, never stopping, looking right at me, and then he left. I had no choice but to stay at this place. There was another truck parked next to me. Kind of a relief, I thought. I was not alone. The store closed at 10 p.m. and shut down all the lights, except for the pump lights. It was totally dark and wind was blowing very hard, and just woods around me, and the guy next to me was fixing up to leave and then left. I was all alone with an expensive load in an isolated place, no lights around with me. Fortunately, I fell asleep as soon as I went to bed. All of a sudden, I hear a loud bang on my driver's side door. I was scared because I didn't know why someone would be banging on my door. He banged harder this time and yelled to open the door that it's DOT. I looked at my phone. It was like 2:30 in the morning. I looked around and I didn't see any DOT vehicles. I slowly get up and was trying to hide myself without making any noise, trying to look outside. There was a big man wearing a cap and not looking up, just banging on my door. Open the effing door, it's DOT and I want to check your logbook. I noticed in moonlight he was not in uniform. I was scared to death when I noticed this was the same man that I saw earlier when I was using the tap. Open the effing door. He started pulling my door handle. I have a pair of bolt cutters in my hands and I'm shaking and praying to God. Then he gets even more angry and yells for me to open the door and that he's going to kill me, and he starts hitting my window with something. I have no doubt it was a large knife. All of a sudden a truck pulled up to the pumps and I pulled on my highway horn, blowing it until I got the driver's attention. He looks to my side and starts walking to my truck with a flashlight in hand. When this guy notices him walking, he suddenly stops and vanishes into the woods behind my truck. When he was close enough, I noticed that they were two drivers who must have been a drive team. I explained my story and they looked around for a few minutes, but found nothing. They said they were stopping for a few hours and they would park next to me. When daylight broke, I woke up and their truck was gone. I called my mechanic. When he arrived, I shared my story with him. He informed me that this part of town was very dangerous and to never stop here again, and gave me a creepy smile. In 2012, after high school graduation, my boyfriend at the time, Troy, and a close friend of ours, a 30-year-old guy named Dan, decided to rent a house together. Troy and I had been together for 4 years, and we just thought it would be easier since we all had friends and jobs in the same town. I've always been a part of that group at school. I had lots of close friends and a good reputation. Troy was great at sports, extremely charming, but he had a reputation for having a bad temper. I never saw it myself, so I was always skeptical. In the beginning of 2013, a few of my friends knew a popular nightclub looking for a bar manager, so I called them. I got a call back the same day as I had the interview. I couldn't wait to tell Troy the news. I was so excited. When he got home, I told him straight away. I thought he would have been happy for me. I watched as he started shaking his head in disbelief. He threw his work boots into the corner and bluntly said, "And do you think I'll ever allow you to work there? I don't date trash." He laughed as he walked off. He made me so mad I just ignored him and everything he would say about it. He even refused to speak to me for a while. I didn't care. He has acted this way before. It usually blew over after a few days. After starting my new job, Troy got more and more angry. Our relationship started falling apart and he started resenting me. He often made remarks like, "I wonder who will grab your ass tonight," or, "Since your shirt's so tight, you might as well not wear one like your stripper friends." Even Dan would join in and make fun of me. After a few months, things escalated pretty quickly. I was so depressed now I would barely leave my room to just avoid them. Dan began slapping my ass when I would walk past the couch or if he was around me when Troy wasn't home. I told him to stop each time and he just acted like it was a joke. He told me to lighten up as if it was just a bit of banter. Weeks passed and things got even creepier with the both of them. Now, I am petite, about 5'7", and these guys towered over me. Both very tall and big built. One morning as they were leaving for work, I woke up to go to the bathroom. I was still half asleep when Dan followed me in and cornered me as I was washing my face. He had his body squashing me over the basin and all he said was, "Now that you're a whore, you may as well be treated like one." Then he smiled and put his toothbrush back in the holder. I have always been a quiet girl. It's hard for me to speak up, so even then all I did was roll my eyes and wait for him to leave. I felt my heart drop. I was so angry and so afraid at the same time. I wasn't scared easily, but he terrified me. I was shaking. They were both very intimidating and they knew it. I couldn't do it anymore. As soon as they were both gone, I packed my things and went to my friend Ainsley's house. I lived with her before and she agreed I could go back since I broke up with Troy. At 5 p.m., straight after he finished work, he drove straight to Ainsley's. He was on our doorstep banging on the door. He said, "Come out or I'm going to come in and drag you back home." Ainsley opened the door and told me to stay inside. She told him off and I heard him say, "Tell that slut if she thinks she can do this to me, she's got another thing coming. This is so far from over." After loads of abusive texts and voice messages, I decided to call in sick at work. He threatened to go there that night to sort me out. He would also send messages begging me to speak to him and that he was sorry. He said he didn't deserve me. It didn't make sense as he would still be abusive about 5 minutes later and accuse me of sleeping with half of his friends. I followed Ainsley's advice and blocked his number. At around 10 p.m., Dan and Troy were constantly driving past. We made sure all the doors and windows were locked and the alarm was on. I slept in until about 5 p.m. the next day, as my body clock was used to it. I had to be to work at 6 p.m. Work went smoothly. I had no issues and made sure security knew what Troy and Dan looked like so they wouldn't be able to enter. I got notified a few times about them being turned away. They were trying to start trouble at the door, but soon left when the police started to patrol. The night ended and I began walking back to my car. The street was empty. There was a strange silence. I walked up to my car and saw that every single one of my tires were slashed. I knew exactly who had done it. Since the main street was only a few blocks long and I lived just up the hill, I decided to walk. There were streetlights all the way, so I didn't think twice about it. Halfway home, I turned around to see 3 large men following me in black hoodies. I suspected it was Troy and Dan and some other guy trying to mess with me. They continued following me and were getting faster. I was planning to wave down a patrol car if I saw one, but once the club closed, they usually left the area as it was empty. I acted like I didn't notice them and kept walking. They were catching up to me fast, so I knew I wouldn't be able to make it home before they got me. I continued walking straight, trying to gain a little distance. Tears were streaming down my face at this point. Everything in me was telling me to run, but I knew if I did, they'd start running and I'd stand no chance. I thought quickly and calmly and walked into a stranger's yard. I began banging on their door impatiently, praying that they would answer. When they answered, I whispered, "I'm sorry, but I'm being followed by 3 men.
So you gotta bring them to my fucking house?
The elderly man let me inside, and from there I had calmed down enough to remember to call the police. He turned the front lights on and the 3 men crossed the street mumbling. The elderly couple comforted me until the police took me home. They arrested Dan wearing a black hoodie a few streets over, but nothing happened to Troy and the other guy. They didn't find them. Dan had a large hunting knife on his belt and was pretty enraged about me calling the police. He kept saying, I wasn't the one that was going to hurt her. Everything he said was written in a police statement, and the text and voice messages were used as evidence to get a restraining order. The police said I did the best thing that night. They had no doubt they would hurt me. I didn't either. I felt it. I knew it was going to happen. A few friends of mine had sent me pictures of a new tattoo across Troy's chest that said, "Take what's yours." They also have a few texts with him insinuating that I was going to be raped. He even said I needed to be left for dead. If I knew that, I never would have walked alone. All of this is a distant memory now. These days, I am a lot more careful. I always turn my alarm on and always lock my doors and windows. I'm just thankful that tires were the only thing that got slashed that night. I still thank God these strangers opened their door at the moment they did. If they didn't, I might not be here now. This happened to my family when I was like 11 or 12. For some background, we live in a small, close-knit southwestern town. My house is pretty small, 1 story, and about 100 years old. We are a family of 4. My parents, me, and my younger brother by about 5 years. We used to leave our front door unlocked, mostly because we didn't ever think something like this could happen in our town. It was Christmas night, so we all went to bed pretty early since we're more of a Christmas Eve type of family. My younger brother and I had each gotten $200 cash from my grandma to help pay for summer camp as a Christmas gift, and it was sitting in my mom's dresser drawer inside her very tiny office. At some point during the night, the money was stolen, along with my mother's car, which was promptly crashed down the street. I was asleep on the living room couch, which is right next to our front door. Important note, our front door is loud. It's made of a really old wood and it's super heavy, so it creaks almost every time you open it. Our 2 back doors were locked, so they must have come in through the front. So basically whoever it was must have walked within a foot of me to get inside the house. That's creepy and off-putting. But what really gets me is my mom's car. My mom keeps her keys in her jacket pocket, which hangs inside my parents' bedroom, on the wall across from their door. Again, you have to walk within a foot of my parents' bed to even get there. But even if my parents had slept through a nearby intruder, how did they know exactly where my mom kept her keys? Or where she hung her jacket every
It
night?
was the brother.
It's not an obvious spot to put your keys, then they apparently knew exactly where to go. Even grabbing the cash from the desk drawer makes sense. A lot of people keep important stuff in there. The car thing just didn't make sense to me. Also, they crashed it right down the street, like literally into the telephone pole at the end of our street. So we figure they were probably drunk, which raises even more questions. How were they able to open our super loud door and walk right past me without me even noticing? And how were they able to steal the cash and my mom's car keys from right under our noses? Both my mom and I assume it's probably someone we knew or know, but we have no idea who, and we probably never will. I'm 20, and this event happened when I was around 18. I live in a safe city in Ohio. Not really much happens here. It's quite boring. This happened on a snowy Friday night. My parents went out with some of their friends, and they wouldn't be back until late. I loved having the house all to myself. I was able to blast music and bring my video games into the living room. Around 8:30, I decided to order some pizza. While I waited for my pizza, I played some video games. At around 9:15, my pizza came. From 9:15 to 11, I watched movies. After my movies, I decided to bring my video games back up to my room and get into bed and play them. The way the house was set up was, as you walk up the stairs, the first door on your left was my room, and my room had 2 windows. Where window 1 was placed, I was able to see the whole backyard. Where window 2 was, I was able to see the roof of the living room. So around 12:45, I heard a loud noise coming from my backyard. So I looked out my window and saw this guy dressed in all black just standing in my backyard. Let me tell you how tall this guy was. I had a shed in my backyard that was about 8 feet tall, and this guy was just about the same height. For about 30 seconds, I was just staring at this guy who was making eye contact with me. Probably a stupid move by me, but I opened my window all the way and get my phone, which was on my bed, and call 911 and tell them there's a man in my backyard and to get here ASAP. As soon as I hear sirens pulling up, this guy takes 2 huge steps and he's gone. I run to open the door and 2 officers go into the backyard and 2 stay to ask questions, and I tell them everything. The 2 in the back radio to the 2 up front and tell them to get back here as they found something. And what they found were footprints, the size of a 28-foot size. I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. They were quite large. They ended up searching my whole backyard and even in the shed. The craziest part is they followed the footprints about 10 feet, and they just disappeared. So for the rest of the month, they had a patrol officer sit outside of my house and a few more driving around my neighborhood. It's 2 years later, and I still have a fear of being home alone and looking out my window at night and seeing that guy. I don't even know if I can call it a guy. I recently moved out of my home state because of something that happened in my old home. I am extremely paranoid, and my therapist has recommended that I take up running again. He knows it helped me when I had postpartum depression, and it helped me to stop having panic attacks. I now run daily.
Okay, guys.
I have 3 or 4 routes
I'm
that I
gonna
take,
call it a
and I
night.
started running into the
Oh,
same
a
people on my
morning.
runs during that time of the day. I've built more confidence in
I did
humanity.
a lot, so I'm pretty happy.
Every day I run in the morning by myself.
I'll show
I
you
go
what
for
I
about
have
3 to
so
5
far.
miles just to get in the right headspace. Yesterday morning, I noticed a 1989 red Buick LeSabre in my neighborhood. It was right before the security gate. We live in a gated community with 25 to 30
That's
other houses.
I got done
I go
so
running
far.
daily.
So I'm almost done.
You notice when something new is there or something is out of
Kind of
place.
messed up a lot of the
I live in
lines,
the more
but I can
northern
fix them up
country-like
with the
area. Think North Carolina,
with a
South
marker or
Carolina, and
something. So
Virginia.
yeah, but yeah,
It's beautiful
this is
here
what
and
I've
we have
been
southern
doing
hospitality.
for the last.
It
I don't
is
even know how
beautiful
long
running
I've
and
been
seeing
doing
the
this,
sun
but
come
yeah,
up over the trees that are changing
that's what
colors.
I've been working on.
It's been great running in the cold weather as well.
All right.
Everyone has been
Adios.
nice. I have had